Hello, I'm Corinna Harrod and this is the Monday Night Review. Hello and welcome to episode 144 of the Monday Night Review. For those of you who follow me on social media, ages ago, 6 months ago maybe, I said I was researching a case and I would let you know when it was happening, and then it's just taken me so long, and there was a huge thing that happened in the middle of my research, which I'll get to. But here we are, it's happening today. I'm in my office with the big pod dog, so if you can hear snuffly dog noises, that is her, not me, and not my friend Alison, who I have insisted, basically.
You've been forced to come here.
Because I'm really worried that this is going to get confusing. It is a really confusing case for loads of different reasons. And I thought, actually, it's going to be better to have someone here to say, you're not making any sense at the time, rather than all of you thinking I've lost my marbles. So thanks, Alison, for coming.
You're welcome. I'm very excited to hear what you have in store.
Yeah, Alison doesn't know what we're doing. I'm worried that you're going to be like, oh, I'm so over this.
I'm really worried I'm going to get really confused, more confused than your listeners.
Doesn't take much.
No.
So we're going to LA in the 90s. You've basically got to let me know as soon as you click as to what we're talking about, okay?
Okay.
LA in the 90s. Sometime after 10 p.m. on the 12th of June 1994, Pablo Farives
Sounds right.
and his wife start to hear a dog barking. And the barking is really persistent and unusual, and it goes on for over an hour. Stephen Schwab is walking his dog at 10:55 p.m. down the alleyway behind Bundy Drive, South Bundy Drive. And as he's walking down, he sees an Akita, and the Akita is sort of running up and down the alleyway, barking, and it looks really distressed, and he goes up to it and he tries to calm it down, and then he realises that it has blood all over its paws. So he works out it's not the dog's blood. It's obviously really weird. He doesn't know whose dog it is. It's 11 o'clock at night. So he goes back to his apartment block, because we're in America, not block of flats. And he takes the dog to his neighbour, who agrees that he can look after it overnight, and then the next day they'll go and try and find who the owner is. But the dog is won't settle, is pacing around and whining, and so Sukru, who's the name of the man who's looking after the dog, decides that maybe he'll let the dog out and follow it, and it will take him home. So he does that, the dog rushes out, and he follows it, and it goes to the front walkway of 875 South Bundy Drive. And as Sukru looks up the dark walkway, he sees what appears to be a lifeless human body surrounded by a massive amount of blood. I should mention you're not really into true crime, are you?
No, I wouldn't say so, although I've listened to quite a lot of your podcasts and I've sort of become a bit more interested. Yeah, but I wouldn't say it's a passion of mine.
No, it was one of my biggest disappointments when we met.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That you were not a true crime fan. But so this is quite gory.
I can do gory.
So he calls the police. The first officers arrive on the scene at 12:13 a.m. and they find the body of a woman, barefoot, wearing a short black dress. She's lying face down next to the steps of a house. She's got wounds to her throat and neck area. And there is so much blood. And near to her, they find the body of a man lying on his side, and his clothes are also saturated with blood. Now, they managed to quickly identify the woman as the owner of the house, 35-year-old Nicole Brown Simpson, and her dog Kato had led the neighbour to the scene. Do you know who Nicole Brown Simpson is?
O.J. Simpson's wife?
Yeah. So, that's what we're doing.
Ah,
and it's
okay.
Complicated.
Which I actually know nothing about. I know
Well, you know...
I obviously know about the case, but I didn't follow it in detail.
Well, so one of the reasons I find this so fascinating is to British people, or non-American people, I guess, it seemed a really simple, cut and dry case. But the more I looked into it, the more I realised why it's more complicated than that. So, Detective Tom Lang, who would be the lead investigator on the case, said it was the most violent crime scene he's ever seen. A rage-fueled, targeted attack that to him implied Nicole had a personal relationship with the offender who had been physically or emotionally violent before. From what he'd seen of being a police officer in LA, that's the conclusion he drew. And it seemed early on that Nicole was the target of the attack, and the man who would turn out to be Ron Goldman was a sort of distressing, wrong place, wrong time person. And they can tell that from the wounds, which we'll get to. Initially, people sort of say it must be a robbery, there's nothing stolen, the house hasn't been entered, or a drug deal gone wrong. So throughout the trial, some people try and portray Nicole as taking drugs, and there's absolutely no evidence that she ever took drugs. And in fact, many of her friends and OJ have referred to her as their moral compass. And I think if you refer to someone as your moral compass, you don't mean they're hoofing loads of gack at the weekend. You know what I mean?
I would say not.
So they really feel that there's rage. There's blood running onto the sidewalk. So they're like, this is overkill, this is rage. And what's really upsetting is upstairs, asleep in the house, are Nicole and OJ's 2 children. So they could have woken up at any time, come down the steps and seen their mother
horrifying
at the bottom. It's really, the crime scene photos are really horrible. So the man is identified as 25-year-old Ron Goldman, who'd moved to LA a few years before. He had aspirations to open a restaurant. He had worked as an employment headhunter, a tennis instructor. He was currently a waiter at a restaurant called Mezzaluna, and he had recently earned an emergency medical technician license, and he was a 3rd-degree black belt in karate. So he's not small. He's a big guy. They would discover that Nicole had been stabbed 12 times, with the fatal wound nearly severing completely through her neck, and Goldman received 20 blows altogether. The medical examiner's report actually notes that the wounds are consistent with an attack by a strong, large man. So throughout all of this, there's this debate as to whether there's one offender or 2, because how do you subdue 2 people? And Ron was obviously able to fight and all of that, so that's something to bear in mind. So this is a gruesome murder, but it became worldwide news and would dominate American TV screens for over a year, not because of the horrific violence involved, but because of Nicole's ex-husband, who would eventually stand trial for these murders, ex-American football player Orenthal James Simpson, better known as OJ. So sources for this episode are The Run of His Life by Jeffrey Toobin, which is there's everything you need to know in that book. Some Real Crime Profile podcast episodes, OJ Made in America, which is weirdly on Disney+. I find it weird when they put stuff like that on Disney+.
There's a lot of weird stuff on Disney+.
Yeah, it started off all cartoons, and now it's
like Happy Place.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
Now it's dark murder. And then O.J. Simpson, The Lost Confession, which we'll get to at the end, which is ridiculous. So, before I go any further, I really want to talk at the top of the show about the 2 victims in the case, because it really quickly gets skewed to other things. On the 19th of May 1959, Nicole Brown is born in Frankfurt, West Germany, to a German mother, Judith, known as Judy, and American father, Lou. She's the second of 4 daughters. They're all, as far as I know, incredibly close. And the family moved to California when she was a teenager, and she attended and graduated from high school there. And in 1977, she was working at the Daisy, a nightclub in Beverly Hills. She was 18. She'd literally just graduated. I think she'd done a few photo shoots. She was thinking she really wanted to go and do a course in photography. And she's on a shift, and O.J. Simpson walks in and just immediately says to the owner who he's sitting with, "Who is that?" And she's so beautiful, and the owner asks her over, and she doesn't really know who O.J. is. She's one of 4 girls. They don't follow football. He, by this time, is 29, so there's quite a large age gap, and he's at the height of his career, and they just seem to be, from the get-go, mutually infatuated. Now, despite the fact that O.J. is still married to his first wife, although he would say they'd already agreed to have a divorce, she's pregnant with their 3rd child. Nicole and O.J. start dating. Her sister remembers her coming home from her first date and her trousers had been ripped, and she said O.J. was, quote, a little bit forceful, but it doesn't seem to cause her any concern. But I really think if you're an 18-year-old girl and there's this 29-year-old celebrity,
really tall, heavy set,
who's, do you know what I mean, sweeping you off your feet, you think?
Oh no, you can take that back.
Oh, do you think? No, I think she'd be really like.
Oh yeah,
I'm
no, I was thinking more about the fact that an 18-year-old is ripping her clothes. Sorry, a 29-year-old's ripping her clothes, like a pretty large man.
I mean, you're not.
But she's probably
But
just
that's
swept
the thing
away by
is that most of us, I think, would be like, that was too much.
Yeah.
But I think she was just part of it. Part of their whole relationship was the fact that she was so young when they met.
Yeah.
That it must have seemed really exciting, and I think he probably was just love bombing her from the beginning. So they were together for nearly 8 years before marrying on the 2nd of February 1985. On the 3rd of October 1985, they welcomed their first child, who's a daughter, and their son is born on the 6th of August 1988. She's incredibly popular and outgoing. Many of her friends and OJ describe her as their moral compass, and she moves into his house on Rockingham Avenue in Brentwood in LA, and she makes it this beautiful home and this place where everyone wants to hang out, and she makes everyone really welcome, and it's seemingly a really fun place to be. They always have people playing tennis and swimming in the pool and having fun, and there's loads of fun party pictures of them. They're basically the American dream couple, but behind closed doors that wasn't the case, and in January 1992 Nicole moves out to a rented house on Gretna Green Way in Brentford, where she'd lived for 2 years, and eventually she files for divorce from OJ, citing irreconcilable differences on the 25th of February 1992. So that's 1992. It's not a straightforward split. Nicole really wants to keep the family unit together, and she keeps going back to him, but then something will happen. She doesn't ever move back in, but they date for a bit, but he becomes controlling and abusive, and so she tries to extract herself. It takes, on average, 7 times for a woman to leave an abusive partner, and I think she probably did clock up the 7 times of just trying to make it work for the family and for her children.
They've been together a good sort of
14 years,
right,
I think,
yeah.
14 or 15 years. So, by 1994, she's living on this house in Bundy Drive where she and Ron would be found, and she's feeling finally free from her controlling husband. Her sisters were like, this was it. She was like, I'm done with his shit. She'd had a few minor relationships, nothing major, like 3 or 4 months. Nicole's oldest sister, Denise, described this period in a 1994 interview, saying that Nicole was, quote, just so vivacious, so full of life. I was so happy for her. For the first time in her life, she was having her own friends. We were talking about going to Yosemite?
Yosemite?
Yosemite!
Oh, I'm useful.
Oh, you are. Well done. Yosemite, camping, taking the kids to Club Med, everything was going to revolve around the kids. And Nicole had been looking for houses in Malibu on the 10th of June, so a couple of days before she was murdered. And so, if you think about meeting someone when you're 18 and being with them until you're 32, and suddenly you're like free, and your friends aren't their friends. And also, I wonder how she felt, like how many of her friends were friends with her because she was Mrs. O.J. Simpson.
Yeah, probably. And when you're 18, you're really still a child.
Yeah.
You know, you haven't really experienced anything. You don't even know yourself properly, do you?
No, and I think her whole life will have been dictated by what he was doing and where he was going. So she'd recently met and made friends with Ron Goldman, who was a 25-year-old waiter from one of her favourite restaurants, Mezzaluna, which is where she'd been on the night that they were murdered. And they'd actually just met 6 weeks earlier. And there's this whole thing about whether she was seeing him or not, and the fact that he was 10 years younger than her. But she's a really beautiful woman, and a friend of his had said, "Oh, is that your girlfriend?" And he was like, "No, we're just friends." And I think he could easily have said to the friend, "Oh yeah," you know, and to make himself look good. So I really genuinely think they were just friends. I don't think she was interested in him, or vice versa. We don't know. He wanted to set up a restaurant. So he was learning every bit of the trade. He had done some modelling. He was doing club promotion. And he was originally from Illinois, where he'd volunteered helping kids with cerebral palsy, which I always have trouble saying, and worked as a camp counsellor. And then he'd done his...
So he's a pretty good guy.
Yeah, and he was doing his karate. And so he was basically making the most of what LA had to offer for like an entrepreneurial young man in the early 90s. So on the night that he was murdered with Nicole and her family had been at Mezzaluna's restaurant, and Nicole's mother, Judy, had left her glasses behind. And so she calls Nicole and says, "I left my glasses at the restaurant." Nicole calls Ron and he says, "I can drop them round after my shift." So it's just clear that this would be terrible timing. Wrong place, wrong time. When his family went to the flat after his murder, they said they found that he had everything planned out for his restaurant, down to the names of the artists he wanted to have on the walls, the drafted menus, the colour schemes, everything. So they just found that really distressing. So that's the two victims. Now we're going back to the horrible crime scene. So Detective Lang would say, quote, it was a very violent confrontation, rage. 2 victims, blood everywhere. We find a glove, a left glove, and we find a trail of blood from the suspect injured on the left side. So they can tell from where the blood drops are that the suspect was injured on the left side, and because the drops fall straight down, they can tell that he was walking.
Okay.
You got it?
Yeah, I've got it.
So, as with every murder and death, the police have to make a death notification to the next of kin, which is OJ, even though the fact that they're divorced. I'm guessing that your ex remains your next of kin until you remarry. But they can't get a hold of him on the phone. They know that he lives nearby on Rockingham Avenue. OJ is friends with the police. They go around and hang out, they go and swim in the pool, they go and play tennis, they go for autographs. So they all know OJ. So they go round to his house. It's like a 5-minute drive. And they pull up to the gate, they ring the doorbell. No answer, no response. And so Officer Mark Furman, whose name you'll have to remember for later, strolls down the street to the other side of the grounds, and through the gate he can see OJ's famous white car. It's a Bronco. So he sees the car and he sees that there's blood on the driver's side door. So now he thinks, shit, what if someone's attacked OJ? What if OJ was the person being attacked and he's managed to get himself home? And so they're like, right, we're concerned for his safety, so they break into the property, basically. OJ's not there. They find a man called Kato Kalin, who lives in the sort of pool house bungalow, on OJ's property. He's kind of a friend of theirs, more of a friend of Nicole's, I'd say. And Kaylin tells Furman that he had gone for McDonald's with OJ previously, earlier in the evening, and then OJ had to get a flight to Chicago at around 11 p.m. When he got back from the McDonald's, he heard 3 really loud bangs on the back of his bungalow, loud enough that he went and stood in a doorway because he thought it was the start of an earthquake.
Right.
But that was it. There was just these 3 bangs and then nothing. And so Furman goes round the back of the bungalow to see if he can see anything, and he finds the matching glove to the one that was found at the crime scene. So that's going to come up in court later. So OJ's gone to Chicago. He's flown out to Chicago, explains why he's not answering the door. They track him down. They tell him on the phone that he has to come back. His ex-wife is dead. And notably, Detective Lang, I think, is who makes the call. He says OJ doesn't ask how she died. He doesn't ask how his children are. And he would later say he didn't need to ask how she died because he knew. And he didn't need to worry about his kids because they'd been asleep upstairs when he left them. I think that is pretty valid. I think if someone phoned you up and said your husband,
well, of course,
is dead, you'd be like, what happened?
Yeah, how?
Yeah, whereas he doesn't say any of that. So, police then call Nicole's family, and as soon as her oldest sister, Denise, hears the voice over the phone saying that Nicole's dead, she starts screaming, I knew that motherfucker would do this. So she has no doubt from the get-go that it's OJ. So Marcia Clark, who would later be the lead prosecutor on the case, she's the district attorney, and she has to give approval for a warrant to search any property or arrest anyone. And so the police go to her and they lay out all the evidence, and she's like, there's more than enough for an arrest warrant with everything that you've told me. And the officer says, don't you want to know who it is? And she was like, well, I don't really care who it is. Why should I know who it is? And they said, oh, it's O.J. Simpson. And I think that's a really interesting part of the case, because that's about the only time that the facts have been taken without O.J. being...
Without his
his reputation coming first. So O.J. comes back from Chicago. He arrives at his house in Rockingham Avenue. He's taken in for questioning. Now, when he arrives, they handcuff him, but he tells them that he doesn't want to be handcuffed, so they take the handcuffs off. And he goes with them for questioning. He has a cut on his left hand, which they photograph when they take him in, and they ask him how he got it, and he can't really give a very good explanation. Initially, he says that he was so shocked after he heard about Nicole that he broke a glass in the hotel room. He put it down and it smashed. But then later he said he scratched it somewhere on his property in Rockingham before he flew. And then, interestingly, a friend of his, a police officer who went to Rockingham Avenue called Ron Shipp, he spoke to OJ at Rockingham before he was taken in for questioning, and he said, how did you get the cut on your finger? And the first time he said broken glass in Chicago. Second time he asked, he said, I was chipping golf balls and I cut it. Don't know how you do that. And then the third, he said, getting something out of the Bronco.
And inconsistent.
And then he says, I feel pretty bad though, because I've had dreams of killing Nicole before. And Ron Shipp says he knew then that OJ was guilty. And there's so much media footage, you can actually see Ron Shipp leave Rockingham Avenue looking really shocked. And he was like, I just knew. He didn't have an explanation, and he wasn't upset, and he kind of did it as an aside of like, I dreamed about killing her. So he's taken in for questioning. It's incredibly ineffectual. they let him kind of ramble on about random stuff. They don't really ask specific questions. Marcia Clark would later say, if he was any other guy, would you have let him go? And everyone's like, well, no. And that's the whole part of the problem with this. So I'm going to give a timeline of events for the evening, because it's really confusing, I know. So you can get an idea of the comings and goings of everyone on the night that the murders happened.
Okay.
So OJ and the Brown family had all gone to their daughter's dance recital at her school. And then afterwards, Nicole and the Brown family were going to go to Mezzaluna to have dinner with the kids and have a celebratory dinner. And OJ's not invited. And OJ's pissed off. But why would you invite your abusive ex-husband? Anyway, so OJ's pissed off. So at 6:30 they arrive at the restaurant. At 6:30 to 7, Kato Kalin is hanging out chatting with OJ at his Rockingham Avenue house. I think OJ goes to talk to him in his bungalow, and I don't think he did that very often. 9:25, Kalin and OJ arrive at the drive-through McDonald's. 9:25, Kalin and OJ arrive at the drive-through McDonald's. 9:45, Nicole calls the restaurant to say my mum's left her glasses behind. And at 9:50, Ron leaves to take the glasses to her. So we know that at 9:50, Ron's still alive, right? So then at 9:40, OJ and Kato have got back from McDonald's. Kato goes to his bungalow. OJ goes into the Rockingham house. OJ tries to call his girlfriend, who's a model called Paula, who it turns out had tried to break up with him earlier in the day. And he gets no response.
So he's angry.
At 10:15, they think the Akita starts wailing. At 10:22, Alan Park, who's a limo driver, has been asked to arrive to take him to the airport for his Chicago flight. Because remember, he's flying to Chicago.
How far away is Rockingham from Bundy?
Like 5-minute drive.
Right.
So
it's a pretty quick turnaround.
Well, he notices that OJ's Bronco is not there. So he's a bit early. He's not due until 10:40. So he's sitting there in the car and he's like, okay, maybe OJ's out because the car's not here. At 10:40, when he's supposed to be arriving, he buzzes the intercom. No one answers. At 10:45, Kato Kalin hears the 3 bangs on the back of his bungalow. At 10:55, Park, the driver, sees... did you like how I did the...
I did.
Just
in case.
The international driving steering wheel thing, just in case you couldn't work it out. He sees a large shadowy figure enter the front door of the house. So he then goes back and rings the intercom, and OJ responds to the intercom saying he fell asleep and he'd just got out of the shower. So at 10:55, Stephen Schwab, Nicole's neighbour, finds the distressed Akita a few blocks away from her home, and he found it really unusual for the dog to bark that way, blood on its paws, everything's sinister. At 11:01, Simpson leaves his home and gets into the car. He complains of being hot, even though it's a really cool evening. So the limo driver was like, oh, it's quite cold, I don't know what you're so hot about. At 11:45, his flight leaves for Chicago. At 12 p.m-ish, the neighbours walk the Akita home. At 12:10, they call the police. So, essentially, they know that OJ called his girlfriend at 10:04. Between 10:04...
And obviously that's from a landline, because it's 1992.
1994. So
1994, sorry.
Yeah, so they can see...
That he was in the house.
That he was in the house and he was making this phone call to her, and that she didn't answer, because they can see from the length of the call. So between 10:04 and basically 10:55, when Park sees the large shadowy figure that we assume is OJ, because also it's through all these gates, like there's security, that he has no alibi. He says he fell asleep and then had a shower. He was getting ready for Chicago and all of that. So the problem with this case is there's three aspects which get confused and jumbled up and get focused on in the wrong order at the criminal trial, and you have to talk about them if you're going to talk about this case. So the first problem is racism in the LAPD, which was at its peak in the 80s and 90s. I mean, all the way through. 60s, 70s. It's terrible. Really shocking. 2, police blunders at the crime scene, of which there are millions. And then 3, the death of Ron and Nicole, which is basically the lesser focus of the trial, which is absolutely shocking. So we need to understand a bit about racism in the LAPD and why it affected this case so much. On the 3rd of January 1979, 2 LAPD police officers shoot Eula May Love, a 40-year-old mother, over an unpaid utility bill. She died on her front lawn in front of her children, and this was then ruled a justifiable homicide.
Wow.
In 1988, Operation Hammer in Dalton saw police just raiding, arresting people, trashing homes, everything's destroyed, looking for drugs that they didn't find, and there's footage of this, and it's just awful. Like, people's lovely, tiny, because they can't afford it, apartments that are just trashed by the police, who don't sort it out, pay for it. And everyone's like, this wouldn't happen in Beverly Hills, it's just because of this area, and this area's actually got loads of families in it. It was just awful. But I've got to remember that in 1988, it's pretty much the height of cocaine use, I'd have thought. And white people, do you know what I mean? Rich white men.
Well, they were all doing it.
Doing loads of cocaine, but their houses aren't being trashed and destroyed. So then on the 3rd of March 1991, 25-year-old Rodney King was wanted on a parole violation, and the police found him drink driving down a road, and they get him out of his car, and he is savagely beaten. Luckily, someone from a balcony records it on a camcorder and then shares this with the media. That you can see him being punched, kicked, stamped on. He's on the floor. You can see him with his hands behind his head, and he's like, it's really horrific. Now, it obviously, but there's an inquiry. None of the police officers involved had even mentioned this in their reports. It happened so often that it wasn't even worth mentioning. King would survive the attack. He had a broken right leg, his face was badly cut and swollen, he had bruises all over his body, he had burn areas to his chest where he'd been stun-gunned, and everyone was just so shocked.
What year was this?
This was 1991.
Oh, right, okay.
So then at 10 a.m. on Saturday the 16th of March 1991, so this is literally 10 days later, 15-year-old Latasha Harlins enters an American-Korean convenience store owned by Soon Ja-do and her family. Do saw Harlins putting a $179 bottle of orange juice into her backpack and thought that Harlins was going to steal it. But Harlins actually had the money in her hand. So said that she asked Harlins if she intended to pay for the orange juice, and Harlins had responded, "What orange juice?" But 2 eyewitnesses, a 9-year-old and his 13-year-old sister, said that never happened. They were in the shop. And she said she didn't. She just immediately accused Harlins of trying to steal. And they said Harlins replied saying she'd got the money and she wanted to pay for the juice. Harlins, in fact, tried to hand-do the money, but the woman grabbed her jumper and tried to get her backpack. Harlins then hits Do with her fist twice, knocking her to the ground, and tries to leave the shop. She actually backs away. Do throws a stool at her, and then she tries to leave the shop, by which time Do reaches under the counter for a revolver and shoots Harlan in the back of the head, killing her instantly. She's 15.
Oh my God.
And the whole thing is caught on CCTV. So you have it on CCTV, you have the 2 kids who witnessed the whole thing telling you what happened. And The jury find Due guilty of manslaughter and recommend the maximum sentence of 16 years. However, the judge sentences Due to 5 years probation, 10 years suspended prison sentence, 4 hours of community service, and a $500 fine. And this just raises tensions between the Korean American and African American communities in LA that were already really strained. Then, in 1992, the 4 officers who had beaten up Rodney King went to trial for doing it, and they were acquitted.
Wow.
And when everyone finds out about this, it erupts. And on the 29th of April, the 1992 Los Angeles riots, also known as the Rodney King riots, start. And the rioting, looting, mayhem lasts for 6 days. 63 people are killed. 2,383 more are injured. And the most damage happens in and around the Koreatown district. The riots only end after the California Army National Guard, the Army, and the Marine Corps come in, and they send in 10,000 reinforcements to help LAPD. Now, a lot of this problem is to do with Francis Gates, who's the head of LAPD, and he is an out-and-out racist. He is asked to comment on footage of an officer with a black guy in a chokehold, and he says it's necessary because, quote, black people are different to normal people. So that's what you're dealing with.
Right,
That's running.
yeah.
He's running the LAPD. Now, he resigned during the riots and just left. He literally just left them to it. So there's no one in charge.
Sounds like a great guy.
Yeah, he's the great guy. So all this is going on in LA around the time that Nicole and OJ are dating, getting married, raising their kids. But they're a mixed race couple, and people have very strong feelings about this because he is OJ Simpson, and they believe that he should. A lot of people believe that OJ should be with a black woman, and that Nicole is the devil. But really, OJ never supports the black community ever. So we're going to talk about OJ because we have to. So he's born on the 9th of July 1947 in San Francisco to Eunice, an orderly at a psychiatric ward, and Jimmy Lee Simpson, who's a custodian for a Federal Reserve Bank. Eunice is basically a single mother. She raises those kids alone. His dad comes back every now and again. I believe his dad is violent. His father's also a drag queen in the Bay Area. And later in life, Jimmy Simpson would announce that he was gay. And indeed, when he was a child, OJ had walked in on his father with another man, and he was horrified by this. I think it's fair to say that he was homophobic, especially in his own family, if you see what I mean. He's just horrified because in the projects where the Simpsons lived, it's just unacceptable for a black man to be gay. Gay white people, fine, but it just wasn't okay. And so he really has a problem with this throughout his life. Interesting, as a child, he suffered from rickets. So he had really damaged legs. You know what rickets is?
Yeah, but I can't remember how.
Rickets is like a calcium deficiency.
Oh, okay.
And so you get like thin
sort of
bowed, your legs don't grow
they bow,
properly.
yeah.
So he apparently always did have bowed legs, but I didn't ever associate OJ Simpson as someone with bow legs. But he used to get called pencil pins at school, and because his parents couldn't afford the treatment, he had these sort of second-hand leg braces that he often wore accidentally on the wrong leg. Didn't stop his phenomenal football career. When he was a below average student, which I think is also important to remember. I don't think OJ Simpson was particularly bright. I think he was savvy about some things, but I think not particularly bright. So he's part of a teen gang when he's in his early teens, and he gets arrested 3 times and briefly detained at the San Francisco Youth Guidance Center. After the 3rd arrest, his coach gets a guy called Willie Mays, who's fielder for the San Francisco Giants and friends with OJ's coach, to kind of talk to him to try and straighten him out. So he talks to OJ for a couple of hours. I don't think that makes any difference. But then he takes OJ to his house, and OJ said, "This is the way to live." And he said, growing up in the projects, the kids that the kids looked up to the pimps and the drug dealers because they were the people that had money and control and the nice things. And he suddenly realised that his football could be his way out and his way to stardom. So it kind of did turn him around. He was an incredible football player. Have you ever seen O.J. Simpson play football?
No, I don't think so. I mean,
No,
I was obviously knew about him at
the time
when I was younger.
But I'd never seen him play.
No.
And I think part of what I find so intriguing about this is, yeah, as English people, I was like, isn't O.J. Simpson like David Beckham? Really? Like, big sports star. It's just off the scale. And watching him play is really fascinating, even though I don't like American football. He is sort of amazing to watch. He has speed and stamina, and his old USC teammate calls him one of a kind. He gets a football scholarship to USC, which is good because I don't think he'd have got to college otherwise. And he gains national fame as a running back, winning the Heisman Trophy in 1968. I know you've always wondered who won the Heisman Trophy in 1968, but now you know. There's something called The Run, which is still one of the best college plays, but he becomes a star overnight. And I think it's really hard for English people to understand just how important college football is in America. I can't think of anything worse than watching boys at university play football.
No, I mean it's
soccer here,
No,
but
I think I've
massive.
sort of heard about college football in America.
So he just becomes this big star, and he hasn't been slacking off the pitch either. He's been dating Marguerite Whiteley for some time. In fact, she had been his best friend's girlfriend, and he just took a liking to her, so took her off his best friend, and his best friend was fine with it. And they get married in 1967. They're quite young, and they'd go on to have 3 children together, and Marguerite was pregnant with the 3rd child when he meets Nicole. She never says a bad word about him, interestingly, and she's incredibly private. She went to his trial every day with her kids, and then after the trial, that was it. Didn't see her again. She's just so private, and I think that worked well for him because she was at home looking after the kids, not
getting involved in
involved.
Yeah,
exactly. So in 1969 he begins his professional football career with the Buffalo Bills as a running back, your favourite team, and he completely transforms them. I've been watching reruns, and he is incredibly compelling to watch. Like, when you see anyone who's really good at what they do, and I think for an English person who's not into American football, it's really easy to be like, yeah, he's a football player. But he's just so fast and agile and big. He is incredible to watch. So in 1973, he sets a record for rushing yards in a season.
Don't know what that means.
No. Well, I think it's just rushing around with the ball.
Okay.
The record is 2,003 yards. And when this happens, after the match, do you call it a match? Game. After the game, he's going to be interviewed on TV, and he insists on taking the whole offence into the studio with him because he's like, I didn't do it by myself, it's a team game, blah, 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 everyone's happy. He then buys everyone on the team a gold band which says the number of yards the team had run that season, not his 2,003 yards. So he's really generous with his time and with his money, and he wants to elevate the team with him. And there seems to be nothing sporting that he wouldn't or couldn't turn his hand to. He's a world record holding track star. People just really wanted to be him. One of the people who worked with him said, quote, he really was that great. But very interestingly, in an interview around the time, OJ said, quote, when I walk down the street, I like people to know me. I need that recognition. I need people to like me. And as my mother always says, when someone tells you about themselves, believe them. Which is very sage advice. I never listen to it. I always think about it after someone's shown their true colours. I'm like, oh, they said they'd do that.
Oh, I
should have listened to my
that.
mother. But he suffers physically. Obviously, it turns out, because, well, it doesn't turn out, everyone knew except for me, but because he had rickets, must have been really hard on his legs. So he gets bad knees and everything, and so he retires from professional football in 1979. His last football game is on the 9th of December that year. But he doesn't disappear into obscurity, as we know. And he sort of transitions seamlessly into acting and broadcasting. He becomes the face of Hertz rental cars, with a very famous advert of him running through the airport, jumping over suitcases, and an old white lady shouting, "Go, OJ!" Have you seen that?
I haven't. I'm just trying to remember. He was in a film. Was he in Naked Gun?
Yes, he's in Naked Gun. He's in Naked Gun. He's the first black spokesperson for Chevy. I think he's the first black person that's the star of an advert. Like, it's incredible. But he's just not interested in the civil rights movement, and he basically sees himself as colourless. To him, he is above it all. He is the portrayal of success. And there are many, many stories of him saying, "I'm not black, I'm OJ."
But he's obviously just enjoying the finer side of life.
Yeah, and
he... The fame, the attention.
Yeah.
He just doesn't want to...
No, and for a lot of people, that's a problem. But for him,
Yeah.
it's like, that's fine. That's worked out well for me. I'm above it. He made people feel really good no matter what colour they are. Everyone loves him. He's basically a national treasure. He's a commentator for NFL games on ABC and NBC. He's in Naked Gun, as you remember. Tragically, in 1979, it's also the year that his 2-year-old son drowns in his swimming pool at Rockingham, which is really sad. Meanwhile, their home, thanks to Nicole, is the place to be. Local police used to hang out there. They used to go and get autographs. And the Simpsons are living in Brentwood, which is a quiet, affluent, safe and very white neighbourhood. Zoe Turr, who's a journalist, said OJ living in Brentwood was a complete anomaly. So some of the black community saw this as him denying his true self. But I think, as you said, it really worked for him to be the only black person in a white world, to be living in that way. And people sort of weren't threatened by him. His talent was just immense, but because he was a black man in this white businessy society, they sort of didn't feel threatened by him. Yeah. He said himself he was raised in the sports world where you're only judged by your abilities. And I think that's true. And it's how it should be. You should be judged by your abilities, not the colour of your skin. But I think he alienated a lot of people because...
Well, because he had so much influence, and he could have done more.
Yeah, and they said, all the people who had been trailblazers for him, they feel like he didn't give a shit about that, and he didn't, as you say, didn't give a shit about people who'd be doing it after him. But in the eyes of the public, he could do no wrong. In 1984, he carries the Olympic torch. And interestingly, he's actually running behind Nicole. Nicole's running in front of him, and he's carrying the Olympic torch. He would stand and sign autographs for hours, and one of his friends, Joe Bell, said, "How can you bear to do that?" And he says, quote, "I wanted this." So sometimes you think, he's a really great guy. And you can see, when you hear this, and you hear about him giving the gold band to all his teammates, and he's just, and the amazing talent on the football field, and him being in Naked Gun, and it all being a bit like, oh look, there's OJ. You can see why everyone just thought he was this great guy, because sometimes he is.
But he liked to be worshipped.
Yeah. During the 1980s, he reinvented himself as a businessman, and as I said earlier, I don't think he actually had the brain to carry it out, because he basically usually cashes in on his celebrity, which is fine. But I think I always use the example of Victoria Beckham, who used her celebrity to then go and learn the fashion trade and learn how to sew clothes and cut clothes and make clothes. And now is a designer in her own right. Yeah. but she really nailed it. But she used her tiny bit of fame. Whereas if you look at most of the other Spice Girls,
no,
they didn't
haven't.
leverage it in quite the same way.
She's obviously really savvy.
And I think she's really savvy and clever. And I don't think OJ quite had the brain to do it. But he now surrounds himself with successful white businessmen. Frank Olson from Hertz, the Kardashians, as in Robert and what's her chops?
Kyle
No,
Jenner?
that's Kylie is one of the daughters.
No, but isn't the mum called Kyle? I mean, I don't know. I don't watch it.
No, the mum's called Chris. There we go.
Yeah, Kyle's
Took a while.
man's
We're
name.
trendy. So, his friend Belle said OJ lost his identity, and that they were out playing tennis on the Kardashians' tennis court one day, and this friend was like, "We wouldn't be here. We're two black guys playing tennis at this mansion. You know, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for OJ." And it made him feel really uncomfortable. And he said to OJ, like, "The only reason we're here is because you're OJ." And it didn't bother OJ at all. OJ was like, "Yeah, but I am, so it's not a problem." Which I don't think is a terrible way of thinking. Not great. And obviously his friend really felt the racial divide. But OJ didn't give a shit.
It's too much, having too much fun.
Yeah, and I think it is okay to not give a shit.
Yeah.
For the most part. Unless you then go and kill people.
Well, yeah.
So basically he wants to erase race as a defining factor in his life, but then he overlooks the people who paved the way for him, and he doesn't sort of do anything to help those in the future. In fact, thanks to Frank Olson from Hertz, he becomes the first black member at the Arcola Golf Club, quote, by a long chalk, but he, quote, just fits right in. And so he then starts golfing. And so he's golfing and hanging out with all these white businessmen. And I think a lot of his friends were a bit like...
Who are you?
Yeah, like, why?
Yeah.
So the word magnetic is used a lot to describe OJ, but some people had already seen the other side to him. He obviously has a narcissistic self-preservation streak. When he's at school, he gets caught by the coach shooting dice in the classroom, I think in the bathroom with two other players, or in a spare classroom, and they get taken to the principal's office. And when the coach leaves, OJ follows, and the principal says, "Where are you going?" And he says, "Oh, I was just helping the coach bring them in." And then he leaves, and he gets away with it. And he just sort of has this confidence and charm. Some saw an insincere side to him, saw that he could use people and he could turn the charm on and off. He was, quote, an incorrigible womanizer. Robin Greer, who's a friend of Nicole's, said OJ felt entitled to anything OJ wanted. He was pretty damn brazen. It was known that he cheated at golf. They ended up having to have a caddy follow him around, which they called the Juice Patrol, because he was so bad at cheating. And people made a joke out of it, and he just kind of charmed his way out of it and was like, "Oh, my mistake," you know. But I can imagine your husband plays golf. Mm-hmm. Cheating at golf doesn't get taken very well.
No.
But OJ, fine. It's just OJ. It's just the juice. So a different OJ exists behind closed doors. He's incredibly controlling of Nicole. I feel like a lot of that, like we were talking earlier about the age difference, you are a child at 18. Mm-hmm. So you're probably quite used to, she was a good girl, she was probably quite used to being told what to do, and then you have this controlling man, and he probably finds it really easy. And some people say that's what part of the attraction for him was that he could control her. He would tell her what to wear, how to have her hair done, how much to weigh. When she gained weight during pregnancy, and I think she gained 10 pounds plus the weight of the baby, he called her fat and a fat pig. And in a letter to her mum, she says, "I think you're right. I think OJ thinks you should gain, the baby weighs 7 pounds, so you should gain 7 pounds." and he just doesn't understand.
Oh, so
that's
she was
not
like,
how it
no,
works.
he's right. He's absolutely right.
Well, no, she's like, you're right, because obviously her mum had said, I think maybe OJ thinks you should just gain the weight of the baby. And then he's calling her a fat pig, and so she's writing to her mum and saying, I think you're right. I think he thinks that... And to be fair, I put on 3 stone every time I had a pregnancy. I was like a whale. I just stomped around. We all know about you and your flat stomach.
Yeah, but I definitely put weight on when I was pregnant. But you're allowed to.
Yeah, but
and you have to.
So basically, in total, she put on £17, which I don't know what that is, but that's
not very much at all.
Not very much.
I mean, I don't know how much it is either.
If Joe had
2 babies.
Do you know what? If Joe had... I was 2 babies. It is 2 babies, 2 of my babies. And if Joe called me fat when I was pregnant,
well,
I would have sat on him. And yeah, like, fuck you. Anyway, so this is obviously really upsetting for her, especially as I think she'd wanted to get into modelling. She is stunning. I think she'd battled, and she says in one of her letters, I've battled the same 10 pounds up and down the scale for the last 20 years. So she obviously is worried about her weight anyway. Later on, when she calls him out for having affairs, he would say it was because she let herself get fat during pregnancy. We wouldn't really find out the extent of the violence and control until we find Nicole's diaries. She leaves 14 years' worth and a handwritten will in a safety deposit box in the bank. Like most women who are victims of domestic homicide, she left a trail just in case something happens. And I think in her will it says just in case something happens. The first incident she documents is in 1978, when after a party they're having sex, he calls her a whore and, quote, beats the shit out of her.
That's in her diary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
She also has Polaroids of her with bruises all over her face. On the 1st of January 1989, the most infamous incident occurs when they get a call, 911 get a call. The operator can hear a woman being beaten in the background. She would later testify at court, and she was like, they were like, and what did you hear? And she was like, I could just hear the sound of a woman being beaten savagely in the background. So police arrive at Rockingham Avenue, and Nicole comes running out of the bushes next to the gate saying, he quote, he's going to kill me. She has a shoe imprint on her face and forehead. She's obviously been beaten. OJ comes out of the house screaming, quote, I don't want that woman in my bed anymore. I have 2 other women and I don't want her in my bed anymore. He says he has, the police officer who was there said he had a vein visibly popping out of his forehead. So he's placed under arrest. But the arresting officer, who's been to Rockingham hanging out with OJ says, can I just go and put some clothes on? And he's like, yeah, of course. And then OJ gets in his Bentley and drives out the back gate. And the police just leave. That's it. He then calls his friend and says, who's a lawyer, and says what's happened. And he was like, I was just defending myself. She was beating me. I just had to defend myself. And he would... And one of the things that makes racism so difficult in this case is a lot of the black community would later say that all of this was an LAPD racist attack on OJ. But can you imagine, I mean, in light of all this horrible stuff that's been going on, I think any other black guy accused of beating a white woman wouldn't be allowed to get in their car and drive off. They'd be like beaten to a pulp. So he drives off. He doesn't get taken in. He would joke to his friends, quote, you think she looked bad, you should have seen me. But people have seen him, he's not got a mark on him, obviously. And OJ is huge.
Yeah.
He ends up being given 120 hours community service, which he spends organising a golf tournament. So...
I mean, you couldn't write it.
He's really paying his debt there. So during one incident, the police arrived and OJ has put he's wielding a baseball bat, and he's put the baseball bat through the windshield of Nicole's Mercedes, and she's like cowering by the car crying. And one of the officers that goes to this call is Officer Mark Furman.
Yes, I remember him.
You need to remember his name. He said he arrived to find Simpson with a baseball bat, a Mercedes with a broken windshield, and Nicole uncontrollably crying. And he said OJ was filled with rage. And he says OJ put the bat down, and OJ just sort of stands there with the bat raised. And he says OJ put the bat down, and OJ is just like wildly staring at him.
Almost.
Yeah. And then he says, I get my, they would call it a baton out, because he was like, I don't want to get fucking hit by OJ Simpson. And he was like, it was like a switch goes off and his eyes go back to normal, and he goes, oh, sorry officer, I don't know what I was doing. And he would then say, I was outside talking to my wife and I was just fooling around with the baseball bat, you know, tapping it, and I accidentally broke the windshield. And it's my car anyway, because she doesn't earn anything and I make all the fucking money.
But she was cowering.
Yeah. And crying. And so Mark Furman goes up and he says to Nicole, do you want to press charges? She says no, and he says, quote, it's your life. And he says he was really angry that she was allowing herself to be treated like that. So, in fact, the police would be called so many times that if it had been sent to a prosecutor, it would have counted as a felony. But it never does. Nicole would often try and cover her bruises. Her sister once went out for lunch with her and she had a black eye and was like, what the fuck happened to your face? And Nicole said, oh, I've just been doing a shoot and the makeup artist did me a black eye. And she was like, well, fine, okay. OJ had to take her to A&E one time because he'd beaten her so badly, and they had to pretend that she'd fallen off a bike and hurt her arm. So I think what is really distressing about this case is in the criminal trial, Judge Ito doesn't allow it to be tried as a domestic abuse homicide. So it's important to understand that domestic abuse is a pattern of behaviour. It's not like an isolated one-off incident. And interestingly, domestic violence calls are where a lot of police officers get killed because emotions are so high that, well, like OJ with the baseball bat, and people kind of have just lost it. Lots of friends and families of Nicole say they missed the warning signs. She obviously didn't want to know people to know what was going on. Again, it's bloody late 80s and 90s where there's this huge shame around. So yes, it's that whole stigma around domestic violence, and the fact that she doesn't want people to know plays into OJ's hands. You know, she's not going to tell anyone. She's going to cover for him. He's really charming and likeable. He switches it on. I've got an interesting statistic about women who are murdered by domestic violence. 5 a day in South Africa. How many do you think in the UK?
Oh, God. A day in the UK?
No, that's not every day in the UK.
Well, I was going to say.
A week.
Year, a week. 1.
2 a week in the UK. 3 a day in the US. That's my...
Wow, 5 a day.
Yeah.
South Africa.
It's a lot, isn't it?
That's a lot.
So Chris Jenner is a very close friend of Nicole's. She said she had no idea...
Oh?
Right, Max. She had no idea what was going on until they listened to the 911 calls that came out after Nicole died, and they saw the diaries and everything. And she was like, we had no idea this was going on. So, criminalist Laura Richards, who has the Real Crime Profile podcast, she describes this murder as, quote, death in slow motion. In one of her diary entries, Nicole says, quote, OJ is following me again, Mummy. I'm scared. I go to the gas station, he's there. I go to the Payless shoe store, he's there. I'm driving and he's behind me. So even after she leaves, OJ stalks her, and the police never do anything. She calls them even after so all the calls to the police are not, I think they're 8 times when they're living together, and then she calls them numerous times after because he will just be outside her house. She briefly dates a restaurateur named Keith. And Keith said in an interview he actually had seen OJ switch from this incredible rage to being normal OJ, where he was screaming at Nicole in the kitchen and then comes through and goes, "Hi, I'm OJ," and shakes his hand and is completely, and I think Keith was like,
terrified.
"But I've just been hearing you." Like,
Wow.
one night they're doing things in the sitting room downstairs because the kids are asleep upstairs. Basically, OJ's watching them have sex through the window.
Oh, Nicole and Keith.
Nicole and Keith.
Right.
I believe she was giving him a blowjob, but he says, and he loses his shit. But he doesn't do it at the time, I don't think. I think it's afterwards where he's like, "And my kids were asleep upstairs, and you know, you're doing this downstairs, and you're a whore," and it's all. It comes out over time. She's like, there's a particular 911 call where she phones up and she's like, he's screaming in the background, and she's like, "My husband's breaking into my house, my ex-husband," and they're like, "Who is it?" And she's like, "You know who it is, it's OJ Simpson, you come here, you never do anything," and he's screaming, and the operator says, "Is there anything you did to make him mad?" And she's like, "It's the same thing he always brings up," and he's basically screaming at her about having sex with Keith. And he's got girlfriends all over. Like, he's been a womanizer for the entire time that they've met. So it's just really sinister and horrible. So she calls the police on October the 25th, saying that OJ keeps barging into her house. And yeah, it's like that's the call I was telling you about. She sounds really resigned. She's like, "You know who he is." So initially OJ uses money to control her. He throws her out of Rockingham, and he's really aware that, you know, she was 18 when they met. She was a waitress. She's then been a stay-at-home mum and Mrs. Simpson and his trophy wife. So she's 35. She's having to start all over again. At the time of the divorce, he was earning $700,000 a year. Do you know what that is in today's money, Alison?
Do I have to try and guess?
Yeah.
Because I'm not very good at this game.
1990, let's say
92, 700.
$700,000.
Anything. Okay, let's go with 10 million.
You're way off there.
Oh, okay.
It's 1,434,000. That's still quite a lot.
I'm not.
Yeah, it's £1,434,350. That's still quite a lot to be making every year. That's like a CEO salary now. He's worth about 10 million. Can you guess how much 10 million is?
Well, I mean, I could probably do the maths if I was good at maths.
I don't think it works it out. £20 million today. Okay, so he... but once she decided to leave him for good, he could see that something had changed and that he was losing control. And for many people, they believe that this is a trigger. Like, she's always been like dangling on a rope. There are letters where she's begging him to come home. She's the one that wants this picture book family, but he never makes any changes, and he's always abusive and womanizing. And then she's just has enough. So he's obviously really losing control. Now, she doesn't ever get anywhere with the police. So 5 days before her murder, Nicole calls a woman's refuge and says, "My husband's stalking me and he's going to kill me." What's very interesting and will come into place later is people who went to OJ's house, I think after Nicole moved out, said there was nothing, it was all OJ. There was like an Andy Warhol portrait of OJ. Everything, there's nothing of his family. There are no pictures of his kids. It's all OJ. So that's some of the background. After the murders, he's taken in for questioning. Then he comes home, and much to the Browns' horror, he goes to Nicole's funeral. And while he's at the funeral, June, Nicole's mother, asks him outright, "Did you do it?" And his reply was, quote, "I loved her too much."
Not yes or no.
No, that's not an answer. I loved her too much. He would later say in the infamous interview with Judith Reagan, which we're going to talk about later, that he looked at her coffin and felt love for her, but also, quote, if you're angry with someone and they die, you are still angry with them. And I wanted to say to her, didn't I tell you? Didn't I say to you? And like what? What, that a stranger's going to come and murder you? No, that you pushed me too far. That's the whole narrative of domestic violence, is it's your fault. You pushed me too far. But like, if you're not guilty, then you wouldn't say, didn't I tell you?
No, definitely not.
So we talked about racism in the LAPD. There's also the massive bungling of the entire crime scene and evidence by the LAPD, which again, I'd say there's racism and race relations becomes the main focus. The absolute bungling by the LAPD becomes the second focus, and the basic facts and the horrific murders are sort of overlooked during the trial. So, they arrive at the crime scene at 12:15ish a.m. They all walk all over the crime scene. They put, eventually...
Are they sabotaging the crime scene, or are they just useless?
They're just useless.
Right, okay.
They all walk all over. They haven't been properly trained for this level of crime scene, I think. And this does change the way that crime scenes are processed in the US. So they arrive. They eventually will cover the bodies with blankets, which is contaminating the crime scene. They arrive at 12:15. They don't call the coroner's office until 6:10 in the morning. They don't say come, they say be on standby because we've got a homicide. They then call them at 8:15 and request a medical examiner. So the bodies have been lying out. Both bodies have evidence of being bitten by ants because they've been lying out for so long. And why are the police not calling for the medical examiner? Within 3 hours of the bodies being removed, the crime scene is washed down.
Right. So they're completely incompetent.
They are. When they do the autopsies, Nicole's stomach contents are accidentally discarded, which would have given a more accurate time of death. So another thing is, by the time the autopsies happen, it's 30 hours after the bodies are found. So it's very hard to pinpoint the time of death. But also, because we knew-ish what time Nicole had eaten, her stomach contents would have been very useful to see then kind of what time. Goldman's stomach contents showed he died sometime after 10:15, but because he was working that night, it's less sure of when he'd eaten, I think. Glasses, Judy's glasses were found on the floor outside, so that showed that he hadn't entered the house. He'd literally obviously come through the gate and seen Nicole being attacked. There were tests that could have been carried out to match the alleged murder weapon to the wounds. This was not done. So we'll go into that more when we talk about the trial, but the whole thing is terribly mismanaged. There's a really embarrassing bit during the trial where one of the crime scene investigators is saying, I never touch anything without gloves. And then they've got, because the media are outside the whole time, everything's on film. And so they can just see him picking up stuff without gloves on. And it's like, well, now
I'm
you
not
lie.
Trained, but I would know
Yeah.
not to do that.
Well, it's ridiculous, but now, and also now you're lying, so you look like an incompetent.
Oh, God.
Anyway, so before we get to the trial, we have to talk about the arrest of OJ. In agreement with the LAPD and his lawyers, OJ Simpson was scheduled to turn himself in at approximately 11 o'clock to the Parker Center Police Headquarters on the morning of the 17th of June 1994. That morning, he's been hanging out with friends, having a great time, having sex with his girlfriend. He's always sort of having a good time. He never seems that concerned. Anyway, and when his friends go up to look for him, he and his best friend, Al Cowlings, who's called AC, leave. They've disappeared. And so has Simpson's white Bronco. And they find a letter So bearing in mind, that morning he had friends visit, everyone was having drinks. He had been like, I'm going upstairs to shag my girlfriend. He's left this letter behind. I'm going to read you the letter. Can I find it? So this is read to the media by his friend Robert Kardashian, who I think pretty quickly discovered that his friend had done this murder. But so he says, to whom it may concern, first, everyone understand, I have nothing to do with Nicole's murder. I loved her, always have and always will. If we had a problem, it's because I loved her so much. Recently, we came to the understanding that for now we were not right for each other, at least for now. Despite our love, we were different, and that's why we mutually agreed to go our separate ways. It was tough splitting for a second time, but we both knew it was for the best. Inside, I had no doubt that in the future we would be close friends or more. Unlike what has been written in the press, Nicole and I had a great relationship for most of our lives together. Like all long-term relationships, we had a few ups and downs. I took the heat New Year's 1989 because that's what I was supposed to do. I did not plead no contest for any other reason but to protect our privacy, and was advised it would end the press hype. I don't want to belabour knocking the press, but I can't believe what has been said. Most of it is totally made up. I know you have a job to do, but as a last wish, please, please, please leave my children in peace. Their lives will be tough enough. I want to send my love thanks to my friends. I'm sorry I can't name every one of you, especially AC. Man, thanks for being in my life. The support and friendships I receive from so many, then he names lots of people. All my teammates over the years, he names people. Without you, I would never have made it this far. Marguerite, thanks for the early years. We had some fun. Paula, what can I say? You are special. I'm sorry we're not going to have our chance. God brought me to you, I now see. As I leave, you'll be in my thoughts. I think of my life and feel I've done most of the right things. So why do I end up like this? I can't go on. No matter what the outcome, people will look and point. I can't take that, even though he said he loved people recognising him in the street. I can't subject my children to that. This way they can move on with their lives. Please, if I've done anything worthwhile in my life, let my kids live in peace from you, the press. I've had a good life. I'm proud of how I lived. My mama taught me to do unto others. I've treated the people the way I wanted to be treated. I've always tried to be up and helpful. So why is this happening? I'm sorry for the Goldman family. I know how much it hurts. Nicole and I had a good life together. All the press talk about is a rocky relationship. Blah, blah, blah. All her friends will confirm that I have been totally loving and understanding of what she's been going through. At times I've felt like the battered husband or boyfriend. But I loved her. Make that clear to everyone. And I would take whatever it took to make it work, even though he threw her out. Don't feel sorry for me. I've had a great life, great friends. Please think of the real OJ and not this lost person. Thanks for making my life special. I hope I helped yours. Peace and love, OJ. So that's what poor Kardashian has to read out and thinks the worst. To me, I haven't read many suicide notes.
I mean, it's like an Oscar acceptance speech.
It is, and it's like, stop banging on about how perfect you were for each other. Like, you weren't. This is nonsense.
Well, he doesn't know about her diaries, I suppose.
No.
But it's all going to be
revealed. But it's, yeah. So anyway, so everyone's really upset and worried about that, and they try and track him down. And eventually, his Bronco is sighted, being driven by AC, and the police start to follow it. And as the police start to follow it, the media helicopters
No, I remember this.
Yeah. So AC then calls the police, and Inspector Lang, I don't think he's an inspector in America, Detective Lang, who's the lead investigator, speaks to AC, who says that OJ's got a gun to his head. And it was like everywhere. Mm-hmm. Did you watch any of it?
I mean, yeah, I think
My mum watched it.
I think it was on TV. Well, hang on, so it's 1992.
94.
94.
You're in 1992.
Yeah, so I was 11. I was 18.
Yeah, my mum was like, I watched it.
Yeah, I do remember. I can remember it being on the TV at home. It was all very exciting.
He just drives. They drive for ages, followed by the police. Now, in normal circumstances, a man with a gun, a fugitive running for the law with a gun, is a risk to the public. Police protocol is that they would have put tyre spikes across the road and then surrounded the car, made him to get out at gunpoint. He probably would have been shot because he is a black man with a gun, the LAPD. Again, doesn't point to me that it's a racist fit-up. He's basically just allowed to do what he likes. One journalist said, quote, "If O.J. Simpson were black, this shit wouldn't have happened. Instead, he got a motorcade. 14 units of highway patrol and police cars are following the Bronco."
But was it high? It wasn't
It
high
was.
speed.
It was so slow.
Yeah, he was just.
It was
tootling
really
around.
slow, and there were people running out on the side with posters saying "Go OJ, go OJ." They're blocking off
Bonkers.
roads. They're. Meanwhile, Lang can hear OJ saying, quote, "I deserve this. I deserve to die. All I did was love Nicole." So Lang manages to convince OJ and AC to go to Rockingham and meet him there. And Lang said, quote, "I did not want him to get out of the car with a gun in his hand. They would have dropped him. They would have had no choice. They had snipers on his roof. Because obviously they don't know if he's going to come out and shoot people. So he persuades him to put the gun down. He gets out of the car. He said he was going to see Nicole's grave. He just wanted to go and see her grave. But they were actually heading towards Mexico. In the car, they found his passport, a fake beard, a wig glue, and a gun. And they had a boat waiting in Bermuda. Bloody farming, isn't it? So he gets taken in.
So he's not
And
going
again-
to Nicole's grave.
No,
is he?
I mean, not with a wig, unless... I don't... Anyway, so, but he's like, "Oh, this is so sad." And obviously they're really worried. And he is on suicide watch. So they wake him... If you're on suicide watch, they wake you up every 15 minutes. But later he'd be like, "The reason I looked so shit in my pre-trial is because they wouldn't let me sleep. Because they were waking me up every 15 minutes because they fucking hated me." And it's like, no, it's because you'd left a...
You had a gun to your head.
Yeah, I think that's probably why. Okay, so we're going to go into the trial now.
Okay.
One huge problem for this trial is, I believe, the judge. Judge Ito, he doesn't allow the trial to be treated as a domestic violence homicide. So a lot of the evidence of domestic violence isn't allowed because he thinks it will cloud the jury's judgment. He's also a bit of a fame whore, I think, and because the trial attracts celebrities into the courtroom, he loves that, and they come to his chambers afterwards. And this trial becomes all about race, all about the LAPD, and them trying to frame OJ and proving that they're trying to frame OJ because they're inherently racist. And it just is incredible how sidetracked it gets. So, for example, the prosecution find the doctor who treated Nicole when she gets taken in for an x-ray when he's beaten her up, and she says she's fallen off a bike. And he says, "I knew at the time it was domestic violence. Not only did it not fit with falling off a bike, but that's what happens with domestic violence." This is not allowed to be... He's not allowed to be a witness at the trial because it's going to cloud the jury's judgment. There are 2 letters from Nicole that are not dated, but they're confirmed that they are from her to OJ. One is allowed in the trial, one isn't. So the first one is her speaking like a victim, but it's more loving. So it says things like, "I know stuff between us was something about me, but I'm not sure why. I'm the one who was controlling. I'm going to change my behaviour so that you're less angry." So that one was allowed. The second one is much more in keeping with the diary entries, where she says, "I see our marriage as a huge mistake. You don't. Do you remember when you beat the shit out of me and we had to go and get the x-ray and pretended I fell off a bike?" That one wasn't allowed. So the focus of the trial should have been the rage and revenge and the like severity of this killing, and it just completely gets diluted. OJ's got friends in high places and in the right places, and he has a lot of money to spend. He hires a team that would become known as the Dream Team, who are a group of men so lacking in morals, it takes your breath away. And one of them, when interviewed later, they were like, so do you believe that OJ is guilty? And he was like, it's not about what I believe. That's not anything to do with it. And you're a bit like, you've seen the crime scene photos. Like, you're a father. How can you... Like, oh, it's just... Anyway, so there's Bob Shapiro. He's a friend of OJ's. He's a Hollywood lawyer. He gets called the Fixer. And basically, his talent is getting stuff done without a trial. He's not a trial lawyer, really. He just is like, you know, this celebrity did this bad thing. We'll just settle it quietly and sort it out. So he is in charge first. And then he gets slightly railroaded by Johnny Cochran, who is this incredibly amazing at speaking black lawyer who's done a lot of civil rights trial cases. He's a real good trial lawyer. He's got the gift of the gab. He can be very charming. And then there's F. Lee Bailey, who's a real hard-ass, experienced lawyer. And they cost 50 grand a day. And in fact, they want to get paid, so they all get shares of the Rockingham house to make sure that they get paid, because this trial would go on for something like 290 days. O.J. Simpson Made in America. There were lots of interviews with his agent, and his agent said in the 3 days that O.J. was in jail before the pre-trial, he was talking about marketing stuff, how to make money. He was allowed to still sign autographs from jail. So he was signing pieces of footballs, any kind of memorabilia. And while sitting in jail, he made $3 million from selling autographs. And what they would do is, you know how football jerseys have the numbers on the back? Yeah. Well, they'd take all the sevens. I think he was 37, but I can't remember. They take all the sevens off. He'd sign all the sevens, and then they'd take it and sew it back on the jumper so that they weren't having to carry these bulky things in. So they'd take in a strip of leather that was going to be made into a football. He'd sign the strip, and then it would be sent away and made into a football. And he was allowed to do this,
wow.
Which I don't think a lot of people would be allowed to do.
No, I don't think so.
So the prosecution, understanding this case as a clear domestic homicide with lots of evidence, sat on their laurels a bit. Gil Garcetti said, quote, the evidence was so overwhelming. Marcia Clark said, quote, we had a blood trail leading from the crime scene to his bedroom. I don't think I'd seen more evidence in any case. So the first thing that the Dream Team wanted to do was, rather than holding the trial in Brentwood, which was this affluent white neighbourhood, they decided to hold the trial downtown, which would be much more likely to have a non-white jury, which they felt would be more sympathetic to OJ. And because it was such a long jury selection, and they said that the case was going to take 6 months, it meant people who could be signed off work for 6 months. So it led to a lower socio-economic jury. Mm-hmm. And so it ended up being 8 black, 1 white and 1 Hispanic juror, which if you're going to be tried by your peers, that's fine. But it was a very specific choice by the Dream Team that many think, because she was killed in Brentwood, she should be tried where she was killed. But obviously, you've also got to take into account people having opinions already from the press and the media, and you've got to be able to give an unbiased.
The jury they found jurors who didn't know who he was.
No, everyone knew who he was,
They
but
did.
they had to go through rigorous tests of looking into their background, swearing that they could form an unbiased opinion, which later, I mean, it would turn out that one of the guys was a Black Panther and they just hadn't noticed, and they were like, that would have discriminated him from being on the jury because he couldn't be fair, but they'd missed it. When OJ sees the jury for the first time, he says to his lawyers, quote, "Guys, if this jury convicts me, maybe I did do it." So he's thrilled. And one of the first things that happens is the jury get taken to Rockingham, where Simpson's lawyers have been sent to change the pictures. So you can see from previous pictures of Nicole and OJ and family and stuff that there's loads of pictures up the stairs of them and their friends, predominantly white. And Cochrane's team go in and they take down any pictures of white people, and it's all black people. And they take a lithograph from Cochrane's office of a black mother and they put that at the top of the stairs. Marcia Clark's furious, really angry. And one of the lawyers, the junior lawyers who worked on the case for Johnny Cochrane, said, quote, "If we had a Latin jury, we'd have had a picture of him in a sombrero." He's like, yeah, we went in, we changed everything, we knew what was going to happen. And Ito knew this happened, the judge, and didn't say anything. Meanwhile, I think they go to Bundy, but it's been cleaned, so there's nothing really to see. So Fred Levinson, who's a friend of OJ's, said, quote, "All of a sudden he became black." Mm-hmm. And this strikes a chord with the African Americans who've all experienced racism in LA. It's a bit like, you know, that thing about Me Too, where it's like this post if you've experienced, you know, sexism or whatever, and everyone was like, there can't be that many people. I think it's the same in LA at this time. It's like everyone has experienced this racism, and so it really becomes a racist, you know, the white people versus O.J. Simpson. Mm. It's also one of the first court cases to be shown on TV, and it's watched by over half the population of America. And this plays to OJ's strengths. He's done TV for ages. He knows how to turn on the charm. He looks to the cameras. And someone who watches him says, when the cameras are on him, he's smiling, he's charming. When it's literally like the camera goes off him and his face falls. Judge Ito as well loves being on the camera. So it's not looking great. OJ's very active in his own case. He is interested, he's making notes, he's talking to his lawyers all the time. Meanwhile, Marcia Clark, the district attorney, she's leading the prosecution, and all the papers are talking about is what she's wearing, what dress she's wearing, what her hair's like, not about the brutality of the crime scene or anything. The papers will also call her a bad mother because she's in court late, she's not at home with her children, she's, I believe, going through a separation from her husband at the time, but obviously there's no mention of any of the male lawyers' kids or wives or how terrible dad they are. So that's really upsetting for her, and because of OJ's celebrity and the cameras in court, everyone involved in the trial becomes like an overnight celebrity. Everyone knows. All the lawyers have people outside their houses all the time.
So it's just a circus.
It's just a complete circus. And the problem is that you've got the prosecution who are kind of like prosecuting workhorses for the county. And then you've got the dream team who are experienced at celebrity, you know, trials. And it's not really a fair match. So the trial shows, the jury see the crime scene photos and they hear the autopsy reports from the medical examiner. We're going to talk about the evidence. Interestingly, there's blood from all three, Ron, Nicole and OJ, at the crime scene, in the Bronco, in OJ's house. So there's blood from all three. There's blood at the crime scene that is matched to OJ's. Blood drops on the Bronco that match the victims. All DNA evidence from this case points to OJ being at the scene and bleeding himself. But this gets diluted by Or were they planting things? Were they trying to get OJ? Was it all a racist fit-up? There's a shoe print at the crime scene that matches a pair of shoes bought by OJ. He denies owning them. He says, I wouldn't wear a pair of those ugly-ass shoes. This actually comes back to bite him at the civil trial later on, where he's then shown 18 pictures of him wearing the shoes, but not at the criminal trial. Another boob of the crime scene team is they lose a file of Simpson's blood. So when he gets taken in, he takes blood. This blood disappears. So then everyone's like, well, they took it to frame him, to drop it around.
Ah, okay.
But I think it's actually just incompetence. So I'm going to talk about the autopsy here. It's unpleasant. I'm not going through all of it, but just so that everyone understands why I think there's no way this could be a random person. The autopsy, so this is the autopsy report used at the trial. So, 1 incised wound of the neck measuring 5.5 inches across and 2.5 inches wide. Transection of left and right common carotid arteries. Incisions left and right internal jugular veins. Transection of thyroid membrane, epiglottis and hypopharynx. Incision into cervical spine C3. So if you feel the bumps on the back of your neck,
Yeah.
he cut through to there, all the way through from the front.
Oh my god.
Multiple stab wounds from the neck and scalp, total of 7. Multiple injuries of hands, including incised wound, ring finger, right hand, which is a defensive wound, and a scalp bruise. Injuries present on the hands, including the incised wound on the right hand, are compatible with so-called defence wounds. Toxicology showed no drugs, prescription or illegal, and a blood alcohol level of 0.2, which is the equivalent of a couple of glasses of wine, which we knew she had. She was out for dinner with her family. They did determine that she'd been about 18 inches off the floor when her throat was cut from the blood spatter. So what it's believed happened is she was banged on the head, incapacitated, stabbed loads. Then the killer went and dealt with Ron, and then her head was pulled up by the hair and her neck sliced. Some believe that her neck was partially sliced and she was lifted up by the knife on her neck. Either way, it's incredibly violent, and people who know about this sort of thing would say it's incredibly personal to pick someone's hair up and look them in the face while you do that. It's stabbing anyway, in terms of murdering people, is considered a very personal, close thing. Mm-hmm. So that's Nicole. Ron's autopsy shows a sharp force wound of the neck on the left-hand side with a transection of left internal jugular vein. Appears to be stabbing and cutting wound. Fatal transection of the left internal jugular vein. Multiple stab wounds to the chest, abdomen and left thigh. Penetrating stab wounds of the chest and abdomen with right hemothorax and hemoperitoneum. So basically, hang on. Multiple incised wounds of scalp, face, neck, chest and left hand, which is a defensive wound. He had loads of defensive wounds. And they believe that perhaps the ones on his thighs were from him trying to kick. Multiple abrasions, upper extremities and hands. 2 fatal stab wounds to the right side of the chest. Fatal stab wound to the side perforating the abdominal aorta, so that's like under your rib cage. Bruises on the knuckles show that he had hit his attacker. Toxicology comes back, no drugs, no alcohol. So the medical examiner says blunt force trauma on the crown of the head for Nicole, possibly the butt of a gun. 4 stab wounds. She went down, there's 4 stab wounds on the left side of her neck. He then believes that her face was smashed into a wall or into the floor when she was attacked. And then while she was face down on the floor, her killer likely grabbed her hair, cut her throat. I mean, really hard It's hard to cut through that much stuff. And the awful thing about the crime scene photos is Nicole's in the fetal position at the bottom of the stairs. So she's obviously trying to
protect herself.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
horrible.
Horrifying. Just so frenzied, though. I mean, that's just...
Yeah.
It's not like a couple of stab wounds. It's...
No, and nothing's stolen. Nobody's entered the house. There's no reason for it. And OJ would always say she was hanging with a bad crowd. That's why he was breaking into the house, because he didn't want drugs around his kids. And she was taking drugs all the time, and she was hanging out with a bad crowd. There's never been any evidence that she has taken any drugs. There's no drugs found in the house. There's no paraphernalia found in the house. She, as he said in a previous interview, is a moral compass. So he kind of was implying, well, she was hanging out with these bad people, and so she had it coming because it was a drug deal gone wrong. But there's no evidence of anything. She's not carrying loads of money. You know, it's very weird. So what they think happened is this is happening. She's been banged on the head. She's been stabbed. Ron comes on the scene, tries to protect her. He gets stabbed on the cheek 5 times, twice across the throat. They think that Ron grabbed the left hand. OJ is left-handed, by the way, to try and hold the knife away. And that's why they find the glove near his body in the foliage. He's got defensive wounds to both hands. One of them has almost completely severed his abdominal artery, which would mean he had, like, once that's hit, he's got 1 minute to live. And there's evidence that there was movement between 2 bodies, so he probably started on Nicole. Ron turns up. Ron has to be incapacitated. He goes back, does Nicole, and then they think he comes back and does Ron's neck. Then they can see from the drops of blood that the assailant goes back towards the back alley where their car would have been parked. Now, there is one witness who comes forward who says that they saw OJ's white Bronco in the vicinity at about 10:45 that night. But everyone's like, oh, it could be anyone in a white Bronco and blah, blah, blah. So there's a lot of evidence. They've got the left-handed glove matted with blood found near the victims. They've got the matching right one found by the Simpsons, by the bungalow. There's bloody footprints around the back of Nicole's house. But because of the mishandling of the crime scene, none of this holds any weight. Because they've lost Simpson's blood, they say we could have dropped the blood at the crime scene. Because because there are policemen all over the crime scene, are those really the footprints? You know, it's just things like that.
What are they saying about the glove, that someone planted it?
So, we'll get to that.
Ah, okay.
So, interestingly, we also hear from lots of witnesses at the trial. Marguerite, OJ's first wife, says he was never abusive to her during his marriage. She said, quote, I would have hit him upside the head with a frying pan. But I would say that he was a very different man then. He was systematically unfaithful. He was incredibly egotistical. And she had no interest of being in the limelight. I don't know what she did for work. She's so private, you can't really find out. But I don't know if she was a stay-at-home mum, if she was a sort of traditional wife thing, and so therefore it worked for him to be able to go out and womanize and be the juice and do all of this, and he didn't have to worry about her. But then he kind of wanted the trophy wife, the younger trophy wife, and that brought out this abusive, controlling side. But she said he never laid a hand on her.
Mind you, if she was really private, she might just not want to divulge.
Yeah, I don't think you'd testify on...
No, I suppose not.
Under oath to say he never had. True. And she's quite firm about it. We hear from the 911 dispatcher who'd taken the calls from Nicole, saying she'd been hearing a female being hit in the background and it was really horrible. So that was allowed, but some of the letters weren't allowed. And the doctor saying that she'd been beaten up wasn't allowed. So it's really weird. But what is extra weird is this whole next thing. So Mark Furman, the policeman, he testifies in a pre-trial. He's detailed, consistent, comes across really well. And author Jeffrey Toobin, who writes Run of His Life, which is like the definitive OJ trial book. He's told by the defence team, he's told by the Dream Team to go and look into Mark Fuhrman. And he basically goes and gets into the basement files of the LAPD. And he finds things that will completely change the course of the trial. He finds that Fuhrman has sued the LA Pension Board, asking to be relieved of being a policeman because his mind is so poisoned with hatred of black people. This article comes out, and when it does, Johnny Cochran is added to the defence team, and he is the black defence lawyer, and it immediately becomes all about race and racism. Fuhrman, it would turn out, is exceptionally racist. There were a number of black policemen who've worked with him who said he was an exceptional police officer, he was never racist to them. And it all becomes about how racist Fuhrman is, and then he hates black people so much that he must have planted the glove. So there must have been 2 gloves at the crime scene, and he took one and he planted it behind the bungalow, as you suspected. So they say he picked up the glove, put it in an evidence bag, and then planted it. There's no proof of this at all. So even F. Lee Bailey says if he was telling the truth about finding the glove, it would condemn OJ. He knows that that is a real big deal. But they're like, Fuhrman wanted OJ to go down, and therefore he planted the glove. So Simpson's blood, Nicole's blood, and Ron's blood are all on the glove. The glove size is XL. There's a receipt from Bloomingdale's signed by Nicole. She'd bought a pair of gloves exactly like that for OJ. They were Bloomingdale's exclusive. They had a woman from Bloomingdale's say, we made these gloves, they're only blah, blah. And the jury could see the glove is big. The glove is huge. Fuhrman's accused of placing the glove. He gets a bit ruffled, and he doesn't at any point say, there's no point in planting the glove if you don't know that OJ doesn't have an alibi. If OJ's out with his girlfriend, or he's already in Chicago, or he's at a nightclub, why plant the glove? Because he's going to be able to say, I was with 800 people at this nightclub. I don't know how the glove got there. Someone's trying to plant. Now, there's a huge problem in that one of the prosecution lawyers decides that he's going to ask OJ to put the gloves on, and this is a hugely infamous thing. So, because it's evidence, OJ puts on a latex glove, and then he tries to put the glove on, and it won't fit. And there's this huge, and you can see he's worried about it. And then once he realizes it won't fit, he stands up and he starts showing everyone and being like joking about trying to get it on. A later interview with his agent, and his agent said, he said to me, they're going to try and make me put the glove on. And I said, OJ, just don't take your arthritis medication for a couple of weeks. And he said, that will really hurt. And he said, yeah, but your hands will swell and get stiff and you won't be able to bend them. So the agent was like, I told him to do it.
Oh, wow.
So that if they hadn't made him put the glove on, everyone would have assumed it fitted, because Johnny Cochran, the lawyer, put the glove on and it was huge. So everyone saw it was huge. But because they made him put the glove on and it didn't fit, it looked ridiculous. So what should have happened at a trial traditionally is he would have been taken into a back room, away from everyone, no latex glove, and someone would have helped him put the glove on. But again, Judge Ito lets it all happen out in public.
To add to the circus.
Yeah. So one of the jurors, I call them good juror and shit juror. Good juror says, had OJ never put the glove on, I would have assumed that it would have fitted. So during Fuhrman's cross-examination, they say, have you ever used racial language in the last 10 years? And he says no. And they say, so you're absolutely sure that you've never used racial language in the last 10 years? And he swears and he swears and he swears. And then a woman comes forward who had interviewed Furman for some sort of film thing, and she'd recorded it all 2 years previously, and it is incredibly racist, and it resonates with every person in the court for what they believe the LAPD's attitude to black people were, and probably was. It's horrible to listen to, and he would later say that he was fictionalising, but it rang true. He uses the N-word 42 times.
Right.
And interestingly, one person says it doesn't necessarily mean he's racist if he's pretending, but it means he's prepared to pretend to be racist. And that is also quite telling, I think. So, problem is, does this show that he planted the glove? No. But does this show that he lied on the stand? Yes, it is. Ron Goldman's father throughout is very vocal, and he would say after this, quote, "This is now the Furman trial." And it just becomes all about racism. And it made the jury lose trust in everything that Furman had said. And why did the judge let these tapes be played? They don't tell you anything about the case. You're not allowed to have any domestic violence stuff mentioned.
Yeah. It's insane.
So, the theory is, at 10:03 he calls Paula twice. She doesn't answer. She's allegedly tried to dump him earlier in the day, which he denies getting any messages about, but they can then prove that he did receive the messages. I don't know if she'd left messages on his answer phone, and he said he'd never received them, but they were able to back in the day when you could just rewind the tape.
Yeah.
So they think, he was abandoned by Paula. Nicole's losing control. He's losing control of Nicole. He wasn't allowed to go out for dinner, and he just goes round in this rage. The jury just don't seem to care. That Nicole's sister goes on the stand crying, doesn't have any effect. It's all really difficult. Ron Shipp, who is the LAPD friend, who on the day that OJ came back said, "I knew he did it because he couldn't tell me how he'd cut his finger." He'd been approached by the Dream Team and had said, "I'm not testifying, he's guilty." But then he was shown the crime scene photos and he said, quote, "It changed me." And he still gets choked up talking about it now. And he said, "I'm testifying, having seen these crime photos." And so they are like, "Great, if you testify, all of these other people are going to testify." And it's this massive thing, and he gets absolutely annihilated on the stand just because he did have a drink problem. So they were like, "Well, you're an alcoholic womanizer," and he was like, "Well, no, blah, blah, blah." So it's all about demeaning the person rather than the facts. So they were like, "Were you friends with OJ?" And he was like, "Well, yeah, I went and hung out at his house." And he was like, "Well, would he call you?" And he was like, "Well, only if you needed a police thing." And they're like, "So you weren't really friends?" At one point, Ron Shipp sits on the stand and he says, "This is sad, OJ. This is really sad. But I will not have the blood of Nicole on Ron Shipp." And after they see this, loads of other witnesses pull out and go, "We're not testifying."
Just because of the way he was treated.
Yeah. Also, lots of people saw that to OJ people were expendable. He showed no emotion, that this guy was sitting there being like, "This is like, and I thought we were friends, and now we're in this position." So basically, the criminalist is then up. He's ripped apart. He's shown without his gloves on. He's shown all the faults. They have this excellent lawyer who knows everything there is to know about science of DNA and all of that, and he picks out all the faults of any testing that's been done. So he kind of baffles a lot of people with his sciencey knowledge, but then he also disproves a lot of things, if that's the way you see it, or he proves that things aren't certain. So, for example, they find a drop of blood on the gate at the back, and that's OJ's blood, but it contains EDTA. Now, Marcia Clark says everyone's blood contains a bit of EDTA, which is a preservative that they put in blood when they've taken it for samples. But she's like, because of the things we wash our clothes in, because of the food we eat, because of packaging, we all have a bit of that EDTA in our blood. But from the prosecution, for the defence, they're like, it's got EDTA in it. You've lost a vial of his blood. It wasn't picked up initially at the crime scene. It was when somebody went back. So did somebody go back and just pop some blood on the gate?
But even, I mean, the whole vial of blood going missing, isn't Ron and Nicole's blood in his car anyway?
Yeah.
So
but this is
surely
what,
that's enough.
This is what I mean. But there's certain things like they find a pair of socks at the bottom of his bed that are saturated in blood. But then they get left hanging in some sort of other fluid. So it gets cross-contaminated with someone else's. So they then can't use the socks. But this is what's so frustrating, is it's like, and I think that's where the prosecution messed up, where they were like, there's 3 people bleeding. We know who those 3 people are. Their blood is at the crime scene, in his car and in his house. Like,
yeah, I mean, that's enough.
That's enough. But it becomes just so much bigger than that. Then they have the closing arguments, and Marcia Clark, she just doesn't come across very well. And then Johnny Cochran steps up and he says, you have an opportunity to stop racism. And I was like, God, if someone said to me, you have an opportunity to stop racism, I'd be like, yeah, great. I want the opportunity to stop racism. Like, you can't put that.
No.
It's not about that. It's about
some double murder.
Yeah, a horrendous double murder and kids without their mum, and like Ron's family just having to deal with their 25-year-old son and brother. It's just, anyway. So this has been going on for 266 days, much longer than they thought. It's been like all absorbing. And so they send the jury off to deliberate on Friday the 29th of September 1994, 1 year and 3 days after they were selected. Everyone thought it would take several days for them to reach a conclusion. They'd heard from 11 defence lawyers, 9 prosecutors, nearly 1,000 pieces of evidence, 266 nights for only $1,130. That's what they got paid. Yeah.
Wow.
It took them less than 3 hours to make a decision. When it's going to be announced, they have to have SWAT teams stationed around this courthouse. They have police horses out. They're ready for any rioting. And I would say that the jurors have been away from home, living in a hotel for 266 nights. They're not allowed to speak to anyone. They're not allowed to speak to each other. They're not allowed to watch television. They're not allowed to listen to the radio for 266 nights. Like, good juror and shit juror both are like, we wanted to go home. I don't want to sit and deliberate.
Yeah, of course.
I want to go home. So they come back with a verdict of not guilty. And everyone is shocked. And the shit juror would later say, 90% of us acquitted as payback for Rodney King. And it's just unfair for Nicole and Ron's families. And I think OJ is such an unworthy person to receive this loyalty, because he's never shown any. Yeah. Good juror says, the mistake was to present Furman and the glove. It wasn't payback. They messed up. Which I think is fair. I think they just didn't anticipate quite how big it was going to be. So Jeffrey Toobin said, quote, I thought he was guilty. I thought it was obvious that he was guilty. So I thought the jury agreed with me. And then he says, I actually thought I might pass out from shock. Ron's father is furious. He calls Johnny Cochran a disgusting human being. He's a sick man and he ought to be put away. Kim Goldman, Ron's mother, is insensible. Good juror says, I was focused on Kim Goldman. It hurt me to know I had hurt somebody else like that, because she just loses it in the court. But all is not plain sailing for OJ. He's free. He's been in prison all this time. But Brentford residents do not want him. It makes it even more of a racial divide almost, because a lot of white people think he did it.
Yeah, what's the media saying? I mean, I don't really remember.
I mean, the media is sort of, I think everyone is surprised.
Yeah.
But he had such support, OJ, from people who were 100% convinced he didn't do it. But there's also never anyone else implied or looked at. And it is seen by a lot of people as payback. It's payback for the LAPD being incredibly racist and for having to suffer racism for so long.
Surely nobody actually thought that he didn't do it.
Oh my God, there are crowds and crowds and crowds. Even when they're doing the slow Bronco chase, there are people with banners saying "Run, OJ."
Because
when he comes out,
diehard fans, they're going to not
he
even
has
listen
such
to
support, but not in Brentwood. When he goes back to Brentwood, people don't want to know him, and he wants this love back, and he starts going to church, which he's never done before, and he starts being black,
Right.
and he says he's realised he's let his community down. He won't do it again. His agent says he never cried for Nicole or the children. And the children have actually been with Nicole's parents this whole time. And OJ's very supportive of that initially. And then he turns up at one of the kids' basketball games, unannounced, and causes a whole... The Browns are upset because he hasn't said he's going. The kid's upset because, you know, suddenly you're playing basketball and your dad's there. He's OJ. He causes a lot of trouble. Not trouble, but he causes a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And so he then takes the kids back and he won't let Nicole's parents ever see them. And when they say, I want to see my grandparents, he says they don't want you. They want you for your money. OJ's agent said that after he was released, OJ confessed to him. The agent said, quote, "What happened that night? OJ, what do you think happened?" Agent, "I've always thought that maybe you did it." OJ, if she didn't have opened the door with the knife, she'd still be alive.
So she was protecting herself.
But I don't think she even had a knife.
No.
Agent says the worst for him is, quote, he left the kids upstairs. They could have walked out and found their mum like that. And the agent says, I know 100% that he did it. And I don't believe that about her opening the door, because I think she knew she's running a bath. She'd run a bath. She had candles going. She had music playing. She was eating ice cream. I think she just opened the door to get the glasses from Ron. OJ would later say, I always had a knife in the Bronco. So when it was searched the next day, they didn't find one, but we'll get into that. So then Ron's parents take him to civil court. So whereas in a criminal court you have to be, there's sure beyond reasonable doubt and all of that. Civil court, it's about majority. So you have to be 51% or more convinced in either direction. And all the evidence is allowed. So Simpson failing a polygraph test in the days after the arrest was allowed, even though we know that they're faulty. Nicole calling a women's shelter in the days before she died, which hadn't been allowed. Her diaries were read out. It was announced that he had said to detectives when he was originally arrested, quote, "The only one who deserves to be hurt is me." And once again, the defence try and show that Simpson was framed, but the judge just refused to allow them to call Furman to the stand, which they wanted to do, to be like, here's this racist policeman. Simpson had to take the stand and did not do well under cross-examination. He couldn't answer why he had a cut on his finger. He said at one point it was on the glass in the hotel. Then police testified saying he was rushing around my house trying to leave for Chicago and he cut his finger. He vehemently denied he owned the shoes, saying I wouldn't be seen dead in those ugly ass shoes. Then he's shown 31 pictures of him wearing them, because obviously he gets papped everywhere. They had phone records showing that he'd received the message from his girlfriend breaking up with him, that he refused to admit that he'd seen. They even have notes from Simpson's psychologist who said that Simpson had spoken to him on that day about Paula breaking up with him.
None of this was allowed.
No.
Wow.
Also, OJ is completely different. So in the criminal trial, he's wearing a suit, he's quiet, he doesn't speak, he's wearing like a jersey, and at one point he goes, "I gotta go pee," and he just gets up and walks off. He's cocky, he's not forthcoming, he laughs, he's keeps sketching stuff, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And he says, "I'm designing a golf course." So he's being like this. AC gets called to the stand, and AC is asked, I think he's shown a crime scene photo of Nicole and is asked if he recognises her, and he cries and has to be taken out. Meanwhile, OJ's like joking around. So a lot of people thought that the civil trial was about the Goldmans trying to get money, but for them they were like, we wanted someone to say that that he did it.
Yeah.
Which they do. Judge Hiroshi Fujisaki, who is no nonsense, won't allow the cameras in, put a limit on lawyers talking to reporters, which Ito had never done, and people were like, you can't just have lawyers showboating in front of the media. And Simpson is found liable for the deaths. The jury is unanimous on this. He's told to pay $8.5 million of punitive damages. 12.5 million to the Browns, 12.5 million to the Goldmans. In total, it's 43 million he's told to pay. But the problem with civil court is they give you a piece of paper that says you owe this much money, and then that's it. The creditors have to go and get the money. And his agent said, quote, he knew he'd never pay. So they'd phone up and the bailiffs would come round. But they'd phone up the day before and be like, we're coming round tomorrow. And so he would go out to play golf, and then his friends and family would come out and move stuff out. Right. So when the bailiffs went round, there's nothing there. So his agent was like, I had like Tiffany lamps in my car, I had all of these expensive things in my car, and I would just go and drive round the corner until the bailiffs had gone.
And it's just a financial penalty. There's no... Yeah. You can't... No. Civil court, there's no imprisonment, no. Obviously.
That's it. So he doesn't pay. He sells Rockingham, but I believe that his lawyers owned quite a lot of it because that's how they'd worked out their payment. But also it means that therefore the Goldmans and the Browns can't get any of the money. He makes between $50,000 and $100,000 for public appearances, and then he hides that money from he has people who will hide that money for him from the Goldmans. He moves to Florida, and when he moves to Florida, he has this whole... It's like he goes back to teenage OJ. He has friends who are much more thuggish, but he's like the Godfather. He's like their king, and he sort of gets a very blown up ego about this. They go to strip clubs, there's loads of women everywhere. He dates a woman called Christine who looks exactly like Nicole. They take cocaine all the time. He does this really stupid rap video that's just women gyrating in front of his face. And it's really seedy, and like there's no real thought for his kids. And actually his agent says that's when he decided to leave. He said, you don't care. It's all about you. And he says, quote, I sure as hell will pay for helping him get away with it. So the agent just feels awful. Now there's this incident in Las Vegas where a guy has been taking stuff from OJ and selling it as memorabilia. And so when he was in prison, he says that loads of stuff was stolen from Rockingham, and it's personal and he wants to get it back. And so OJ gets a group of friends together with guns, and they go into his hotel room 1203, and Simpson is, quote, getting angrier and angrier. Someone else says this guy had a face on him that was just rage, and they go into this hotel room and they say no one can leave. They're thrusting guns in people's faces, and they start taking OJ's stuff back. but then they start taking other stuff. So they're stealing from these people, and then someone calls the police, and OJ's arrested for armed robbery. So one of the other guys takes a plea deal. He's hilarious because he's like, there's all this thing about not snitching. They're all in prison. I don't want to be in prison. I'm going to snitch. So he says exactly what happened, and OJ is quite cocky on the stand. You can see him. He was like, I just wanted my stuff back. It's all my private stuff, and they'd taken it, and I didn't know anyone had a gun, and I just wanted to go in and intimidate them and get my stuff back. The female judge is having none of it. He is found guilty. He's given 33 years in prison, 13 years to the day that he had been acquitted for the murder. So everyone is outraged on his team because they're like, that's ridiculous. But nobody leaves this room, which is what he's heard to say, is counted as kidnapping. And so they give him the maximum for that. So shit juror says, she obviously regrets her decision. She said, I did what I thought was right at the time. Now you're on your own. And I think everyone's just a bit like, oh, you were our hero, but now you're just a douche canoe. He goes to prison. He's let out after 5 or 9 years. 9 years, I think.
Oh, okay.
So he doesn't do his 33 years. He gets paroled. And then after...
What year is this now?
2000 and... I can't remember when he goes to prison. I can Google it. Hang on.
I don't really remember any of this now.
No, because it was hardly...
It wasn't really publicised?
No. It was all like, oh, he'd done armed robbery, but it wasn't really. It was just a massive... There's a really good quote from Zoe Tour that says, no one fell from grace harder than O.J. Simpson. He's arrested for battery and burglary for pulling the glasses off another motorist during a traffic dispute. 2007. Before he gets put away for armed robbery, he does an interview for a book. I don't know if you've heard of this book. I worked at the publishers when it happened, so I knew all about it. But the book was called If I Did It.
Vague recollection.
And it basically, I think OJ felt like he was being forgotten, so he agreed to do this interview that was recorded with Judith Reagan, who was the publisher, who then got fired because they were like, ethically, this is very unsound. So we hear from the ghostwriter. The ghostwriter says, quote, to me there was no doubt that he wasn't making this stuff up. So the whole idea is it's this hypothetical version of if OJ did it, how he did it, which is fucked up in the first place.
So, and he was involved in this book?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really weird.
Oh yeah, it's all written by OJ, but with a ghostwriter. In part of it says, on page 81, it says, quote, Nicole, Jesus. I looked down and saw her on the ground in front of me, curled up in a fetal position at the base of the stairs, not moving. Goldman was only a few feet away, slumped against the bars of the fence. He wasn't moving either. Both he and Nicole were lying in giant pools of blood. I'd never seen so much blood in my life. It didn't seem real, and none of it computed.
That is just so weird.
Yeah. And in it he talks about like she had candles burning and blah blah blah. And it's like nobody knew that. How like
oh wow.
Anyway, so the Goldmans are like, you can't make money out of this fucking book, you twat. And so they get given the rights to the book. So this interview, there's just the one I saw, The Lost Confession it's called. There's like criminalists and lawyers and Nicole's friend who just silently, dignifiedly sits crying throughout. It's just insane. And one of the lawyers, his worst lawyer, the worst prosecution lawyer I'd say, even though he seemed really nice but he really fucked up, he is watching and he's like, if we'd had this, it's just an open and shut case.
Yeah.
Because he says things like, historically I leave when we have a fight. So he says, A guy turns up at the back gate who I really didn't recognise to be anyone. As if, he's just a nobody. It doesn't matter. And when Reagan asks him questions, he sometimes says, I don't recall, or I don't remember, which if you're talking about something hypothetically, you don't recall it or remember it because you're making it up. So quite often he'll say that. And you can see that he thinks he's cleverer than everyone. He doesn't see that he's, some of the stuff he's saying, you're like, this isn't hypothetical anymore. So he talks about the candles, about the music playing, and he says to Reagan, because she's obviously quite standoffish, he says, I'll win you over. He's just got no self-awareness. He says, quote, I've always kept a knife in the Bronco. The Bronco was searched on the night and there was no knife found. Quote, I just remember Nicole fell and hurt herself. I take the knife. I do remember taking the knife. If it's hypothetical, dude, you don't go, I do remember taking the knife. That I do remember. He says the cuts on his hands came from the victim's fingernails, which would fit with Ron punching out at people. At one point he laughs because Judith Reagan says something like, this happened. And he laughs and he said, I had no conscious memory of doing that. And then he says, quote, it was horrible, absolutely horrible. And that is
just bizarre.
Comes to the end of our whole horrible OJ debacle.
Is he?
OJ, well, so I started researching this because I kept being like, it's too boring to do on the podcast because there's no, he did it. And,
it seems...
there's not enough info. And then, so I started getting more and more into it and reading more and more about it. And then, halfway through it, OJ died. So OJ died. He had cancer, May 2003, February 2004, undergoing treatment for prostate cancer. He died of prostate cancer on the 10th of April 2024, by which time I thought, I'll be able to do this episode.
Oh, he's just died?
He's just died.
Ah,
But that was what's so weird, because I was researching this and I was watching all the reruns and blah, 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 and then suddenly it was like, O.J. Simpson has died. And I was like, what? I'm just knee deep in O.J. Simpson.
Okay.
So, yeah, he died. I feel incredibly sorry for their kids because they've got...
what?
I think their mother was a great, really involved mum, and they were denied that at quite pivotal ages.
How old are they?
I think they must have been 1994, 11, 12, 10.
And then were they then estranged from him?
Well, no, they went to her mum's, and then...
No, sorry, then after, obviously, the civil...
Well, then,
when
then they were early 20s.
But so did they cut off contact with him once he was found guilty?
I don't think so. But I really deliberately didn't do very much research on them because I also tried not to mention their names. I mean, obviously you can. I'm looking at Wikipedia now and you can see their names, but I feel so shit for them that I didn't want to look at what they were doing or what.
Or if they've written a book or anything.
No, they haven't.
Or they had done any interviews.
No.
Yeah, it's really sad.
I think Nicole's family, I think, were very even-handed about their relationship with their father. And in one bit of the interview, Nicole's mum goes, he's their dad. I'm not gonna... Yeah. We didn't badmouth him. We didn't talk about it because that's their dad. So I think they were quite even-handed with it. And I think they didn't like him kind of turning up unannounced, bustling in and causing a scene. And he just went, right, you're not going to see them. Which isn't best for the kids, I don't think. Do you know what I mean?
No.
you're going to Florida and taking loads of drugs and shagging loads of women. It's not.
Well, yeah, because the grandparents would have given them a bit of stability. I mean, they'd have been hearing all about it at school, and oh my God, it's just horrendous.
And the fact that during the court case, so the documentary I watched, which was excellent, which is not The People versus O.J. Simpson, Made in America, O.J. Simpson, five episodes, and in I think it's the last episode, they show really graphic crime scene photos. The crime scene photos you can find on the internet are really graphic, but they're mostly Nicole is mostly in a fetal position, and there's just a lot of blood, which is horrible, obviously. But they show close-ups of her neck and her face, and same for Ron, and they do that in the court, obviously. And you'd think that would refocus people to be like,
to stop talking
this is
about
just
racism, save it for another case.
This is just horrendous. And I think, God, those kids, like, do they see that?
Bear thinking about. Yeah, I mean,
it's the problem with the internet.
Yeah.
You see stuff without.
Mind you, I've never seen them.
No.
So
but would you be tempted to Google?
Well, I probably will now.
No, if it was your parents.
Oh no, I don't. Well, I don't think I would, because you couldn't put yourself.
But
through
what
that.
I mean is, if you Google Nicole Brown Simpson, I think on the images
it comes up with her.
There's loads of photos of her looking really beautiful.
I just cannot believe that he was acquitted.
I know, I think loads of people can't. And I think what's really sad, in a way, even though I personally definitely think he did it, but he kind of had a second chance, and he went to church, and he went to, and said, I haven't been supportive of my community, and I'm going to change that, and I'm going to use all this money to find out who did it, who killed my ex-wife and stuff. Never obviously made any effort to find out who killed his wife, because he knew. But he had this sort of second chance with his supporters who had been standing outside the court and who'd been saying free OJ, and then he just fucks it over and over again by getting arrested for stupid things.
Kidnapping and armed robbery.
There were loads of
misdemeanors as well.
I mean, what didn't he do? It's just like, it was just a real mess. Do you have any doubts that O.J. Simpson did it?
No, none at all.
I do think that if you're a psychopath, there are lots of traits of a psychopath, and I think the word is bandied about too often, but one of the things that you are very good at is turning it on and off, the charm. Mm-hmm. And I think also you can convince yourself of things, of lies. And
so he wove this story, and then he started to believe it himself.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then he's written this
written If I Did It. But I mean, can
that's
you
just
imagine
the weirdest...
if your husband had been brutally murdered at any point, and you'd been through a trial, but at any point would you think, this is appropriate? I'm going to write a book about...
Imagine if I did it.
Imagine if I'd done it, this is how I'd do it.
It's just... I mean,
like,
that's just completely bonkers.
Yeah.
That's like not somebody of not sound mind.
I think that's someone who thinks that they are cleverer than everyone.
But also, he's obviously a narcissist, and...
But interesting that he never beat his first wife. I always, in my head, think... You always have violent tendencies.
Yeah. Was he taking drugs? I mean, was he...
I don't know while they were married. I know that he smoked a joint when he was telling his agent if she hadn't opened the door with a knife. Again, but he says if she hadn't opened the door with a knife.
Yeah.
But I don't think she did. She was expecting Ron. And I wonder if he got extra angry. He didn't know that Judy had left the glasses at the restaurant and whether he was beating up Nicole. And then Ron arrives.
Oh, and then it
and
just
he
escalated.
assumes that that's her current squeeze, and he loses his shit. I feel so sorry for Ron, who could frankly have turned and run, but didn't. And he is found like backed into a corner. There's like a tree and the railing, and he can't. There's nowhere for him to go.
I'm amazed that no one
heard or saw.
Yeah, like how?
It's right. That's the thing. It's right next to the street, but because it's a quiet residential area.
Yeah, but still, there must have been a lot of noise.
I don't know that there would be. I don't think there would necessarily be a lot of noise from her. But also what's really distressing is that there have been numbers of cases that I've read about where something terrible has happened and women have been screaming and it's been ignored because domestic violence is ignored and because it's not unusual. And so I cannot remember what case it was that I covered, but the woman is screaming and the neighbours are like, I think it's the murder of Kitty Genovese, who was in America, in New York. And loads of the neighbours were like, yeah, but there's
just having an argument.
There's always a woman being battered. And it actually led to a whole thing called the bystander effect, which was talked about. But yeah, so whether people heard her and him and just thought,
oh, it's just another one of those.
Yeah, it's just but also, you know, he's barging into her house. You can hear him breaking into her house in one of the 911 calls, and she's going, OJ, the kids, please don't scare the kids. You're going to scare the kids. And then she says to the thing, he's going to beat the holy hell out of me, you know. And you think, and he's screaming quite far away. So you think she's hiding from him. She's on the phone. You can still hear what he's saying, and no neighbours are getting involved.
Yeah.
And if you read, like, even on some of the Wikipedia things, slightly implies, you know, that after some tequila, Nicole could become really difficult and aggressive. And it's no excuse. Domestic violence shouldn't happen either way, men versus women or women versus men. But it is this sort of painting of a picture. And also it's very interesting, you know, all the little ticks you get for a sufferer of a domestic abuse. Like the letter saying, it's my fault, I should do better, something makes you angry, I don't know what it is, but I need to fix it. It's like, if you don't know what it is, how can you fix it? And nothing should make your massive male partner so angry about you that he beats the shit out of you.
Well, it was all probably irrational. Well, not all of it, but a lot of the time it would have been just irrational.
Well, that's the thing, but it's
behaviour.
a classic. I mean, I think she left her shoes. She took her shoes off and left them in the hall once, and he lost his shit about it.
I mean, I lose my shit about that with the kids.
Yeah, same. But I think she was just like, you know, I took my shoes off and you absolutely lost it. It's like, God, if I lost it with Joe every time I tripped over his massive shoes that he's left, like, I'll go in now and headbutt the floor because of his wellies. I think his behaviour speaks volumes. Not looking for anyone. Like, if you just watch a tiny clip of him in the civil court.
Well, I'm definitely going to have to
He's
start.
such a twat.
Is he?
Well, you think you're sitting there talking about what happened to two people, and he's like designing a golf court.
Well, yeah,
people.
I mean, that's outrageous. But I guess he thought he was untouchable.
Yeah.
That he was just going to get away with it again.
That's why he did the armed robbery. That's why, for everything, I think, you know, he thought he could do this weird interview with Judith Reagan and it would be fine because he was the juice. He's untouchable. I wonder if he did a deathbed confession. He's not religious, so I doubt it.
Yeah, I just just the fact that she wrote a diary.
So
For
sad.
8 years.
14 years of diary.
14 years of diary.
14 years of diary. In the...
Sorry, how often did she write this diary? Like once a week?
I don't know, every
Once a
time
month?
there
Or
was
just
an
every
incident.
time? Oh, okay. So it was
She was
actually...
documenting it, and she had Polaroids of her having been beaten up. And her sister, her sister took to the stand and said, I was there once. She did something to piss him off, and he picked her up and physically threw her out of the house.
Right, yeah.
And but the problem was that her sister got on the stand and was like gunning for OJ, and the jury were just like, I think the jury were mostly pro OJ, and therefore just wrote her off rather than her kind of being calm and stating the facts. As you would be deeply upset if someone had done that to your sister.
So it has actually, I wonder, I don't know this, but obviously the whole trial being on film and it being a circus and the lawyers being interviewed, have they changed the laws?
Yeah,
for that
I think so. But what I found really difficult was that in the Made in America documentary, they speak to a lot of the lawyers. They speak to everyone really, apart from OJ, obviously. And the defence lawyers are just cold.
Right.
Someone at some point says they think that Kardashian has a moment where he's like, oh shit, my friend did it.
Double murderer.
Yeah. But they're just... Johnny Cochran's dead, so he wasn't interviewed, but they're just like... The little dude that was on Johnny Cochran's team, who was like, if he'd been Latino, we'd have had him wearing a sombrero, just didn't give a shit. And
it's... Yeah, all of that stuff with the house and the pictures as well. It's just...
And the fact they were allowed to do it. The whole thing. So I think things have been changed in terms of like what is allowed, what isn't allowed, how you can behave and how you can't behave. But like half the population watched the court case. It was on all the time. I don't think we've ever had... I can't imagine anything like that. But I don't think in the UK we've had anyone like OJ. Like...
No, there was the Oscar Pistorius.
Oh, I'm desperate to cover that.
Yeah.
He did it.
Yeah. Definitely.
Again, if you don't know where your other half is, don't shoot through a closed door into your bathroom.
There we go, there's your next one.
I really want to do the... Do you remember the couple that went on their honeymoon to South Africa and she died?
Yes.
And we found out about that when I was sitting with my South African friends, and we read it in the paper, and both the South Africans were like, he did it. And I was like, oh, why? And they were like, because no woman who looked like that would just be killed. She'd be raped and killed. And she was just killed. It's just so someone's paid.
Oh, God.
It's a cheery podcast I do, isn't it?
It is.
Do you love it?
Well, no, I really do, actually.
Took you a long time to start listening.
Yeah. But they're really fascinating, a lot of the cases.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being my snotty guest.
Yeah, I know, sorry.
Well,
I think there's something...
There is definitely something that's setting Alison off.
Me
and so the poor thing has been
snivelling.
Trying not to sniff. It might be the massive dog in the small room.
Yeah, but...
Are you allergic to dust?
I am.
Because I've just put that on for the first time, and it's a heater. So it could be like sending dust up.
I'm allergic to dust. It sounds
dust.
So weak.
Dust. Yeah, your little weakling. With
It's
your
not
dust
the dog.
allergy.
It's not you, Magda.
You're allergic to dogs.
No, but I'm not really. I'm like really slightly.
Slightly allergic to dogs.
Yeah, but I've got 2 dogs, so you know.
I know, but I just thought maybe in a confined room with turbo fur it might be.
No, I just think you need to dust more.
Oh, that's definite. That is. I think I shall use you as my new dust detector. I'll just waft you around the house and you start sniffing. Well, it's 11:15.
I know, it's bedtime.
Thank you so much for doing a real stint so that I didn't confuse everyone.
To be honest, I'm glad it was a podcast. It was that podcast and crime, and not some lurker in a dark, like on a dark road as I drive home at
I did think
11
of that last night. You know how
time.
I shouldn't be talking about this when you're about to go home, but you know how
I'm going to take Magda with me.
in some should be useless when you actually need her useless. Getting something delivered, dangerous to tactile. You know how sometimes in scary movies you see sort of something flash behind. I can't remember where I was going, but I was running through the gate the other day and it was kind of dusk, and I thought, oh my god, what if someone just is lurking behind the shed that we're in and just takes me out? And then I thought, oh no, just get on with it, just try and be an adult. Joe's away, try and be an adult for the children in the house rather than being like
yeah, but you just get things like that in your head. So before I went out came here this evening, I thought, I'm just going to go and make sure the doors are closed and locked, because George will forget.
Yeah.
And then I'll come home and I'll have to go
round the dark
house. And I actually planned for being scared after this podcast.
I once went to
because it was O.J. Simpson, I'm not scared.
No, he's gone. The baddie's gone.
Yeah.
I once went to something in London and I was driving back here really late at night, and I was listening to podcasts about BTK. Don't know if you know about him. No. He's very horrible. BTK stands for bind, torture, kill. It's just very horrible.
It stands for what?
Bind.
Oh, bind.
Torture, kill.
God.
He's actually a douche canoe. But I was listening to this. It was a 2-parter, so I was like 2.5 hours or something in, and it was the middle of the night, and I had to actually phone Joe. I think I got home at like 2 a.m. I'd been to a gig in Brixton.
Don't start telling me scary stories.
No,
now,
but I'd been to a gig in Brixton, and so I was driving back, and I was like, look at me with my cool gig in Brixton, and now driving back to my house in the countryside. I can have it all. And then I was listening to this, and then the road was closed from Farnham, so I had to go through all the wriggly roads. I took a wrong turning that was a dead end, and I had to turn around, and I just, you know when you're like,
you start to,
well, now I'm down a dead end and no one knows I'm here, and what if someone's lurking, and so then I was locking the doors, and by the time I got home I was like, Joe, you just have to come out and get me.
Done a little wee in your pants.
I know. I've actually got waterproof sheets on my car now because I just
when you're listening to the podcast.
Constantly sitting in my car in my driveway getting terrified. But I'll walk you to your car now.
That's fine.
George won't be awake when you get home.
No,
so
he won't.
You're on your own there.
I've got 2 dogs.
Welly might lick them to death. Do you think if a murderer came, Welly would defend you?
I don't think so.
Oh, what about Mabel, Mike?
Mabel would drop a ball by his feet. and hope he'd throw it to her. I actually don't think they'd protect me. I don't know, Welly.
Loki and Magda would protect me.
Yeah.
I used to, going around, and I'm sure maybe I did the podcast at this time, but when we were first in lockdown, in London it was really weird. Must have been weird here, but in London it was really weird because I always walk the dogs at night, and I lived in Hammersmith. It's usually really busy, and after about a week I was like, there's no one here.
No.
And I've always been quite cocky about walking around at night because I'm like, I'm a Londoner.
Yeah.
I walk around at night, it's fine. And then suddenly I was like, I don't think bad guys really care about catching COVID from me. And so they're probably still lurking, and it's just me. And I did think I have got Loki, and I did used to tie his lead around my wrist so I couldn't, if something happened, I couldn't let go. Because I thought he probably will try and take out someone's windpipe.
I mean, I would feel quite safe with Loki.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say quite safe from Loki. I was about to start.
I am safe from Loki.
Start a fight. Well, thank you so much. I would love you to come on again with your allergies or without.
I will. I'll come back.
Oh, and my outro is very fitting. Be kind. Stay safe. Always check the back seat before you drive. Especially now.